Hannah was on her knees on a stone floor she had never seen before, one hand still hooked through the strap of her work bag. The light under her knees was going out. A second ago, it had been a circle of blue lines burning cold through her tights, and now it was fading back into ordinary flagstones. All around her, people in dark red robes were cheering. One of them had both fists in the air, one was crying. 20 minutes earlier, she had been walking to the station in the rain, wondering whether the shop on the corner still had anything hot left. A young man came down the steps at the far end while the cheering was still going, and the cheering shaped itself around him. Blonde, blue-eyed, dressed like an illustration of a prince rather than a person. He introduced himself as Elliot Rodney, Crown Prince of the Rodney Kingdom, and welcomed her to it with both arms open. Then he explained what she was for. A demon lord was coming. The kingdom had spent a great deal to reach across worlds and pull a hero out of one, and she was the hero, and she would be the one to kill it. Hannah asked to go home. She said she had not agreed to any of this, that there were people expecting her at work in the morning, and that she would very much like to be sent back where they got her. He did not answer that. He told her to show them her power. An old mage with ink on his fingers shuffled forward and explained that she only had to say the word out loud. Status. She felt ridiculous saying it. She said it anyway. A pane of pale light opened in the air in front of her chest, close enough to read, in her own alphabet, which she decided to be alarmed about later. Her name sat at the top. Below that, a row for class, which was empty. Below that, a row for skills, and that row had exactly one line in it, heart to heart. Below that, at the very bottom, in the same plain letters as everything else, was a row for magic power. The rank beside it was SS. She read the bottom row twice. She did not know what the letters were worth here, but she could count them, and 3 of anything sounded like a lot. The mage was reading over her shoulder. He never got that far down. He was looking at the skills row because that was where a hero was supposed to be, and he read it out to the hall in a voice that started confident and did not finish that way. Heart to heart, he announced. I believe it is a translation skill. He tried it a second time, quieter, as though a second attempt might improve it. The very pinnacle of translation type skills. The cheering did not stop all at once. It came apart in pieces. A woman by the pillars lowered her arms in the middle of a clap. A man at the back sat down on the step behind him. At the side of the hall, a chancellor leaned over and said something to a scribe, and the scribe stopped writing and did not start again. Elliot asked what use that was supposed to be. He asked whether that was all of it. He told her to display the rest. That's all of it, Hannah said. That's the whole screen. He stopped speaking to her after that. Not to the room, just to her. She was being discussed instead of addressed, 4 steps away. The hall was full of people who had watched him pay for this. The ritual had cost the kingdom something the public had not been told about, and the prince had stood in front of these same nobles and promised them a weapon that would make the empire on their border think twice. What he had produced was a woman in office clothes with a skill for talking to foreigners. Every second she knelt there, the bill stayed on the table where everyone could see it. So he cleared the table. He did not look at the mage and he did not look at her. He said it to the room in the flat tone of a man sending back a delivery. 4 words. Get rid of her. Hannah waited for someone to laugh. She had been waiting for someone to laugh since the circle lit. 2 knights took her arms and lifted her off the floor, and the old mage folded his hands together and studied the flagstones, and nobody laughed. The screen was still hanging open as they turned her around, that bottom row sitting on it unread. The one line in the kingdom nobody had bothered to read. She closed it. Nobody put her in a cell. They took her bag, walked her down a servant's stair and out a side gate, and by the time the sun was low, she was on a road heading east with the capital shrinking behind her. The man at her shoulder gave his name once and then stopped talking. Douglas Harrow, Knight Commander. He was built like a door. He carried a sword, a shield, and a water skin, and nothing at all for her. She asked where they were going. The Demon Forest, he said, and that was the whole conversation for the next hour. So she counted what she had, which took no time. Office shoes with the left heel already turning, a lanyard, a skill for talking to people who had just decided she was disposable. Twice she got as far as opening her mouth about the bottom row. It was good information. That was the problem with it. SS clearly meant something in a world where an old man could change color over a line of text. And if she said it out loud, the commander would turn around and march her straight back into that hall, and they would put her on the floor and price her again. She had watched what these people did to a number that disappointed them. It had taken about 4 seconds, so she said nothing. She walked in the wrong shoes and let an entire kingdom go on, believing it had summoned a translator. The forest started the way a wall starts. 1 step of farmland, then trees packed so close that the dark inside them was already night. Douglas stopped at the edge and told her to walk in. "What's in there?" she asked. "Monsters," he told her. Then, after a moment, that there had never been a report of anyone walking back out. Then he drew his sword. Hannah got her hands up. It was a useless thing to do, and she did it anyway, and he froze with the blade half raised and looked at her hands, and something went across his face. He reached out slowly, took a lock of her hair at the left side of her jaw, and cut it off. He held it up so she could see it. He would file her as dead, he said. Done on the road, the body burned. No remains to inspect. If she had any sense, she would go east and never come back through that gate. "I am sorry, lady from another world," he said, and it came out as one complete formal sentence. The way a man says a thing he has already practiced. "There is nothing more we can do for you." That was when she found her voice. "I won't thank you," Hannah said. "This doesn't count as helping." He did not answer. He folded the hair into a cloth, tucked it inside his glove, and looked at her once, straight on, properly. Then he turned and walked back the way they had come. He did not look back, and she stood in the wind watching him not look back until the road took him. Nobody in that capital was going to examine a lock of black hair in a cloth. The prince needed her gone. The commander needed the file closed. The mages had already been told what to say about the summoning, which was that it had failed. Between them, the story was airtight, and Hannah was dead in the paperwork before the rain even reached her. Then the rain reached her. It came down the way rain does when it has no intention of stopping. Within a minute, her shirt was stuck to her shoulders. Within 2, she could not feel her hands. She looked at the road, which led back to a hall full of people who had ordered her killed, and at the trees, which had never given anybody back. She went into the trees. The cave was a crack in a rock face, low enough that she went in on her hands and knees, and it was the best thing that had happened to her all day. She got 5 steps back from the entrance and sat down against the wall. The rain had found the gap in the rock and was working on it patiently, one drop at a time, directly onto her left shoe. Hannah considered moving. She had been considering moving for about 20 minutes, which was roughly 19 minutes longer than the decision deserved, and she recognized the feeling. It was the same one that used to keep her at her desk until the cleaners came. Somewhere behind her in the dark, something growled. She apologized to it out of pure office reflex. The growling stopped. Then it started again, closer, and something came out of the dark at her, white, small enough to hold in 2 hands. Fur stood up along its spine, front feet planted like it had a plan, eyes the color of amethyst catching what little light there was. A puppy, growling at a full-grown human with everything it had, which was not very much. Hannah stayed exactly where she was. "Sorry," she said again. "It's your cave. I only wanted out of the rain. I'll go if you want me to." The growl stopped in the middle of itself. The ears came up. The puppy took 2 steps, stretched its neck as far as it would reach without moving its feet, and sniffed her fingers. Then it walked into her hand and pushed its head up under her palm. She sat in a cave in a monster forest with a wet puppy leaning on her hand, and had to stop and breathe for a second before she could talk. She got a thumb under his chin. "Garm, you're Garm, the hound that guards the gate of the dead," which was the only guard dog she could think of, and a ridiculous name for something that fit in her lap. He wagged anyway. A pane of pale light opened in the dark beside her head and put 2 words in front of her. Taman completed. She did not get to ask what that meant. The floor moved, not a tremor, a lift, the whole cave rising a hand's width and setting itself down again, and Garm went stiff in her arms. The dripping stopped. Then a voice came out of the rock, with no mouth in it and no direction to it, filling the whole space at once, and announced the transfer of full authority over the dungeon to the new dungeon master. It said her name. Then the cave stopped being a cave. The ceiling went up. It did not crack and it did not fall. It climbed, the rock over her head sliding away into a dark that kept going, until a chandelier came down out of that dark and lit. The walls straightened out and were paneled wood. The floor under her hands went from wet stone to stone that was smooth and dry and warm. 2 staircases grew out of the far end and met at a landing halfway up. A carpet unrolled itself down the middle of the hall like water running the wrong way. The last piece of the cave, one cold shelf of rock at her back, folded down into a fireplace with the wood already stacked in it. Then it was quiet and it was warm, and Hannah was sitting on the floor of a hall the size of a train station in her wet office clothes, holding a puppy. Something was standing at the far end of the hall. It was black, about her height, and it had no shape she could put a name to. It moved like something poured. It was wearing a tailcoat. It came the whole length of the carpet, stopped in front of her, and bowed from the waist. "Welcome, master." Hannah got up off the floor, mostly because it seemed rude to keep sitting. She asked what it was. It told her it was the dungeon's management golem, generated to assist whoever holds the dungeon, and that the authority had passed to her the moment she tamed the wolf. "He's a puppy," she said. "He is also your predecessor, master." She asked where she was then. The golem said this had been a cave that morning. A dungeon grows on the magic of whoever owns it, and this one had grown when it got her. It now ran 99 floors. She was standing on the bottom one, and it had no record of a dungeon doing that in a single night. Then it added, politely, that the expansion had drawn on her magic power, and asked whether she was feeling unwell. She was not. She had not felt anything at all. That got a pause out of it. The pause went on slightly too long to be nothing. The thing rippled while it talked, and she was trying to be adult about that and losing. It noticed. It offered to take another form, whichever form the master preferred. "Something calmer," Hannah said. "A butler, middle-aged, someone who looks like he's been doing this for 30 years. It took the better part of a minute. The black ran upward and set, and what was standing there when it finished was a tall man in his 50s, black hair gone white at the temples, calm blue eyes, a butler's coat with the creases still in it. He bowed again, the identical bow, and asked whether this was satisfactory. It was extremely satisfactory. She told him so. He lifted a hand and a panel opened in the air between them, wider than her status screen had been, with 3 lines on it. Dungeon create, monster create, item create, facilities, monsters, and, he said, anything at all, provided the master could picture it clearly. Everything drew on her magic, he added. He had started to explain what her reserve would allow when he stopped, checked something she could not see, and said that he was unable to calculate it. She tried it small first. She pictured a cheap ballpoint pen, the kind that lives in the bottom of a bag. A pedestal rose out of the floor with the pen sitting on it, cap and all. Hannah looked at the pen for a while. Then she looked at the puppy, who had woken up and was watching that pen with total professional attention, and she worked out that she had not eaten since a world ago. After that, she stopped being careful. She made a portable gas stove and a canister for it, a shallow iron pan, wide and flat, bowls, plates, chopsticks, a ladle, a table and chairs to put around the table. Then she went after the difficult part, which was not the equipment. There had been a place 2 streets from her office, an old beef hot pot restaurant downtown with a counter and 8 seats. She had eaten there maybe 6 times, always alone, always the same order, always the seat at the end. She could still see the tray coming down in front of her, beef sliced so thin it went transparent at the edges, spring onion cut on the angle, mushrooms, grilled tofu, a heap of greens, 2 raw eggs, and the sweet dark sauce in its own small jug. She pictured it plate by plate, and it arrived plate by plate. The golem watched the pedestal fill up. Then he reported, with no particular expression, that the master's expenditure had not measurably moved her reserve, and that this was not a sentence he had expected to say tonight. Hannah lit the stove, put the pan on, and poured the sauce in. When it started to move, she laid the first beef down flat, and the sound it made went across the whole hall. So did the smell. Garm came off the floor like something fired out of a tube, put both front feet on her knee, and pointed his nose at the pan. She caught the first piece before it could go any further, blew on it twice, and held it out to him on the chopsticks. "Careful, it's hot." He took it, swallowed it without troubling to chew, and then stood there with his tail going like a windmill, staring at the pan with his entire body. Hannah laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, and it was the first noise like that she had made since the circle. She filled a bowl, cracked an egg into a dish, and sat down at her table. There were 2 places laid on it. She had set the second one without deciding to. The table jumped. The sauce slid to one side of the pan and stayed there. The golem's head came up before the sound reached her. "Intruder, descending." She asked from which floor. He said all of them. Then she heard it, a long way above her, the noise of a building being taken apart and getting louder. Something was coming down through her dungeon, and it was not using the stairs. The golem lifted the table in one hand and the stove in the other and moved both of them clear of the carpet. The ceiling came down in one piece. Dust rolled out flat across the floor. Something dropped through the hole behind it, wings unfolding and catching, and hit the stone hard enough to swing the chandelier, black, scaled, the size of a warehouse. Its head alone was longer than her table, and when it settled and turned that head toward her, the horn nearest the wall took a line out of the paneling. The voice that came out of it filled the hall the way the transfer announcement had. "I am the death black dragon. The north is mine. The land of death is mine." Hannah looked at her dinner. Dust had gone straight across the top of the pan. She had been summoned, priced, sentenced, marched out of a city, robbed of a piece of her own hair, rained on, and told the forest had never given anybody back. all of it since breakfast. Whatever part of a person handles being frightened had been used up hours ago and had not come back on. You came through my ceiling, she told it. I was eating. The dragon stopped. The golem stepped in front of her and said quietly that one breath from that mouth would take this floor off the bottom of the dungeon. It did not breathe. The head came down instead, closer, close enough that the heat rolling off it started drying the rain out of her hair, and it looked straight past her at the pan. What is that? It said. In the pot. What is that smell? Something wet landed on the stone beside her shoe. Hannah looked down at it, then up at the golem. That, the golem said, is the death black dragon's drool, master. Hannah put the lid back on the pan. The dragon told her, again, to hand over what was inside it. No, she said. She told him that where she came from, if you wanted somebody else's dinner, you asked. She added that he had come down through her ceiling while she was eating, and that in most places that was worth an apology. The hall got quiet enough to hear the broken stones settling. Then the head came down another few inches, and the death black dragon, ruler of the north, asked her for some. That was terrible, Hannah said. But it counts. She opened the panel and built until the table was covered. Broth, beef, 3 more burners, bowls the size of washtubs. He ate all of it and asked for more twice. Garm worked on a slice of beef under her chair. What do I call you? She asked. He gave her the title again. She set the lid down. That's a job. What do people call you when they're not scared of you? Nobody, he told her, had ever been in that position. She looked at the largest living thing in the world eating out of her cookware. Victor, you came down through every floor I own and announced yourself like a man who'd just won something. Victor. His head came up off the pan for the first time since the food arrived. A name from a master was not a courtesy, he said. It was a transaction. It moved things on a status screen, and it did not move back. Do you want me to take it back? He said he had not said that. He tried the name once himself, then put his head down and finished her broth. She told him he could not sleep in her dining room at that size. He did not shrink. He folded. Wings, neck, the whole warehouse of him going down and inward until a man stood on her carpet in a long black coat, barefoot, black hair to his collar, the same red eyes. He was still looking at the empty pan. Hannah opened the panel and put her ceiling back. It closed from the top down, 1 floor at a time, and took about as long as boiling a kettle. Victor said he would be staying. She asked why. You're cooking, he said. And that was the whole answer. Garm was already asleep on the couch. She left them where they were and went to bed at an hour she did not want to know. She woke up, made herself clothes that were not a suit, and came out to find them already at the table. Garm had his chin on the wood. Victor had both hands flat on either side of an empty plate. The golem remarked that the master appeared to have tamed the death black dragon in one evening with a pan. I told him to stay in human form so he'd stop breaking my ceiling, Hannah said. That's the whole relationship. She made a toaster first. It sat on the counter and did nothing because there was no power anywhere in the dungeon. She went back to the portable stove instead and built pancake mix, milk, eggs, butter, and a bottle of syrup, and started pouring. While the first batch went brown, she asked the golem what his name was. I am a golem, master. That's a species. He said golems were not given names. Hannah said the word a few times over the pan until the sounds came apart in her mouth, moved the pieces around, and handed back what was left. She turned around with the spatula still in her hand. Remus, if you don't like it, say so now, because I'm going to keep using it. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had gone somewhere thin, and he bowed and stayed down a beat longer than a bow needs. Hannah found something urgent to do with the pan. Then he opened his own screen and reported, with some difficulty, that every one of his numbers had moved up. Victor said, around a mouthful, that he had warned her. Names bound status in this world. She had not paid a coin, and she had changed what Remus was. He told her to look at her own screen while she was at it. She did, standing at the stove. Dungeon Master, Master of the Magic Wolf, Master of the Golem, Friend of the Death Black Dragon. She looked up at that one, and Victor said he had acknowledged it and kept eating. And underneath them, in the same plain letters as the rest, a word nobody at that table had given her. Outcast. Did somebody write that in there? She asked. Remus said the screen did not take dictation. It recorded what was so. Hannah closed it and flipped the last pancake. Victor was saying that the Rodney Royals were fools, throwing away a woman who cooked like this, exiling her over a bad skill roll. It wasn't exile, she said. and reached for the syrup. The bottle made a small sound on the wood. Garm stopped chewing. Remus stood with a plate half lifted off the table and did not put it down or raise it. Victor set his fork on his plate, which he had not done once for anything else that morning. She told it the way she used to report a printer fault. The prince had a hall full of nobles and mages. When the old court mage read out her one skill and called it a translation skill, the cheering stopped, and the prince said 4 words to the room without ever looking at her. Get rid of her. The knight commander walked her east out of the capital instead of doing it in the courtyard, cut a lock of her hair at the tree line so he could file her as dead, apologized once properly, and get left. So I was lucky, Hannah said. It rained. There was a cave. There was a puppy in the cave. Nobody filled the silence for a while. Garm got up off his chair, walked the length of the table, and lay down against her arm. Victor spoke first. Then we build a dungeon. No human takes. Ever. Remus set the plate down at last and said he would assist. All right, Hannah wiped her hands. Show me how it works. Remus began with where they were standing. Floor 99, the bottom. Anybody with a little magic could scratch a small dungeon out of a hillside. Nothing this size had appeared in living memory. Can we make it look small? Hannah asked. Boring. Not worth the trip. Victor said a small dungeon simply gets cleared. That was when Remus explained the part nobody had mentioned yet. If a dungeon is conquered, the master's authority transfers. Not shared, not contested. Whoever reached the bottom floor and finished it would own the hall, the panel, all of it, and Hannah would own nothing again for the second time in a week. She looked at the table behind her with 3 used plates on it. Then it doesn't get taken. She built for most of the day. Floors 1 through 10 went to natural caves, low ceilings, wet rock, the kind of place a first-timer survives. 11 through 20 became ruins, collapsed pillars, dry wells, a stairway with half its steps gone. After that, a forest, then a desert, then an ice field, then black volcanic rock. Somewhere in the 60s, she ran out of ideas entirely and said so. Victor, watching from the second chair, suggested dead mountains. No water, no growth, nothing that could be eaten, and nothing that would want to. He said he could call some of his kin down to live there. You have kin, Hannah said. He said several, and that they were bored. Remus dropped a minotaur at the head of the ruins to hold the 20th floor, said he would handle the rest of the monster placement himself, and then asked for the standing order on intruders. The usual instruction, he said, was to kill anything that came in. No, he waited. So she wrote it herself and made him read it back. The difficulty rises 1 floor at a time, gently enough that anybody paying attention can tell when they are out of their depth. And nothing in this dungeon follows a person who turns around and runs. Not 1 floor, not 1 step. Victor told her, flat and without heat, that a rule like that would eventually get somebody she loved killed. I heard you, Hannah said. Write it down, Remus. Remus wrote it down. He also said, more carefully, that what she had done since breakfast should have drained a nation's worth of magic, and that the panel still could not put a number on what she had left. Hannah, who had read her own magic rank off a screen in that great hall and had not said the words "SSS" out loud to anything living since, suggested the panel was broken. Can I have electricity? She asked. Remus told her she could have anything she could picture clearly, outlets included. She typed a high-class apartment, furnished, with working appliances and outlets, and the paneled hall stopped existing. What stood there instead had a hallway, a wide pale floor, a wall of glass with a city view that did not exist, and a kitchen with an island. Garm took the corner too fast, slid the whole length of the hall on his side, and hit the baseboard. Victor went through the place opening every door he could find, including the dishwasher. Hannah put her hand on the light switch and flicked it twice. Nothing in the building drew on any grid, Remus said. There was no grid. It ran on her. She plugged in the toaster from that morning and watched the element go red, then ran the tap until it steamed. Then she opened a cupboard and found 6 glasses in it, the exact stubby kind she used to own 2 of, and stood there with the door open for a while, in a kitchen that smelled like a place that had just been cleaned. Far to the west, in the palace of the Rodney Kingdom, the king's office was in use. The king was not in it. Ethelbert was upstairs in a bed he no longer left, and his son worked at his desk now. Elliot Rodney did the complaining first. The ritual had cost lives the crown had never written down anywhere, and what it had bought them was 1 woman with a translation skill. He said the figure out loud, the way a man reads a bill for a service not rendered. Then he asked Douglas Harrow whether she had been disposed of properly. Yes, Highness, without a doubt. At that hour, she was arguing about a volcano. Elliot moved on. He wanted the mouths of everyone who had stood in that hall sealed, permanently, before any of it reached the nobles who had funded the ritual. He did not say by what method. Douglas did not ask. Next, the demon forest was to be searched, in case the demon lord was being born in it, not with soldiers. The soldiers were all sitting on the Bastion Empire's border and would stay there. He wanted the guild hired, adventurers, expendable, and billed by the head. Douglas said the treasury would feel it. The prince did not answer that. Then he said to start that plan again. Douglas's hand went to the top of his sword hilt and stayed there. Highness, you truly mean to carry it out? A second time. Elliot did not explain what it was. He never once named it in that room. He said only that it would take a few more lives than the first attempt, that a few sacrifices before the demon lord's subjugation were unavoidable, and that this time he expected something worth the price to come out of the circle. He asked whether the knight commander had an objection. No, Highness. Every man who had ever put an objection into that room had been dismissed from service or had simply stopped being mentioned. Douglas bowed, went out, and wrote the orders in his own hand at a desk in the corridor. The folded cloth inside his left glove had not been moved since the tree line. Victor asked what her world had been like. She said no magic, none, anywhere, for anybody. They had science instead, and she opened the refrigerator and let him put his arm inside it. He wanted to know which ice spell was on it. Nobody knows how it works, Hannah said. We just pay for it monthly. She made a town magazine to show him the rest, and Victor stopped being casual about it on the second page. He asked what the pictures were, how they had been painted so exactly, how many years one took. She told him a photograph takes about 1 second. He went through it twice. She leaned over and turned pages for him. That was her train station. That was the river. That was the coffee place on the corner where she bought the same thing every morning for 6 years, and the street it stood on ran down toward her office. And on an ordinary Tuesday at 8:30, there would be. Hannah stopped. She put a hand over her mouth, which did not help at all, and cried for about a minute and a half, and hated every second of it. Victor watched her do it without moving away. Crying is not shameful, he said, and put his hand on her head and patted it twice, firmly, exactly the way she patted Garm. She made tissues. She laughed at herself, and it came out wet, and she gave up on that too. She folded the tissue into a square. My parents are gone. There's nobody at home wondering. There's a girl at work getting married next month, and I said I'd be there, and I won't be, and she'll think I just didn't come. He asked if she wanted to go back. If there's a way, I'd take it tomorrow. She wiped her face. I don't know if there is one. Victor said he had lived a long time and had never once heard of a summoned person going home. Then he picked the magazine back up and said the pictures were good, but he could not read a single letter of it. Do you want to learn? He said yes, before she finished the question. From across the room, Remus asked whether the master would also teach him about her country. Garm put his head on her foot. Nobody came. Days of it, then weeks, then months. The dungeon was running and the floors were finished, and not one adventurer arrived, because not one person alive knew the place was there, so they had time. She taught them her letters out of children's books and picture dictionaries, and Victor turned out to be a fast reader and a terrible speller. He found a comic about a chef and demanded the food in it, so she built 3 trays of cold rice and raw fish, and they ate the lot. Garm ate his own weight in the one with the sweet sauce, and then went to sleep against the couch. He was up past her knee now, too big for her lap. The cameras were her idea. She built hundreds, put them on every floor, and made a room for the screens. She was standing in it with a cup of tea, checking nothing in particular, when something crossed the 14th floor. White, blurred at the edges, roughly the size of a person and not shaped like one, drifting along a corridor of cut ruined stone without touching the ground, and gone off the frame while she was still leaning in. She called them both. Remus came, looked where she pointed, and said the corridor was empty. Victor could feel magic through a mountain. He looked at the same screen for a long moment and said there was nothing on it. Hannah did not answer either of them. The shape had come back, and it was moving toward the stairs. The shape went down the stairs and did not come out on the next screen. Hannah watched the empty corridor a while, then set her tea on the console. I'm going down to look at it. Remus reported no life signs from outside the dungeon, and none since the day the cameras went up. Then it isn't from outside. She pulled her sleeves down over her hands, which is the worst of the 2 options. Garm was on his feet before she reached the door. Victor came too, mildly interested for the first time in a week. Remus asked to accompany them. Someone has to watch the screens in case it comes back up. She stopped in the doorway. If it does, don't follow it. Just tell me where it went. He bowed and stayed where he was. She put the 3 of them in the corridor from the monitor, 14 floors down. It was empty. She checked both directions, which took 90 seconds and felt considerably longer. Do ghosts exist here? Undead came up where a great many people had died at once, Victor told her. Old battlefields, mostly. Has anyone ever died in this dungeon? No one has ever been in this dungeon. That helped less than it should have. She had been 8 the last time she she went into a haunted house, and her father had carried her out past the whole queue. Garm barked once, straight up at her, tail going. He says if anything scary comes out, he'll bite it. She scratched his ear. Thank you. Victor looked at the wolf, then at her. He barked. That's what it means. 10 floors down, the ruins stopped and the forest started. And a forest was where a thing would go to stop being in a corridor. She moved them there. Upstairs, it was the middle of the night. Down here, the sun was 2 hours from setting, because that was where she had left it. They walked for 10 minutes. Garm kept to her left and put his nose into everything. Something crossed in front of her face. Hannah screamed, got both hands into the front of Victor's coat, and put him between herself and it. It is a spirit, Victor said. She opened one eye. It hung at eye level. A ball of white light the size of an apple, 2 thin wings, no face to speak of, tilting the way a bird tilts when it is deciding whether you are food. Sorry, did I scare you? It's fine. I scared myself. The light did a loop. Victor's head turned. What are you doing? Talking to it. It has not made a sound. Hannah let go of his coat. It hasn't stopped since it got here. He looked at the spirit a long moment. He could see it perfectly well. He described it back to her unasked, down to the wings and the way the light brightened when it was pleased. And he did not understand one word it said. Neither of them said anything about that. The spirit talked fast. Humans had come into the demon forest recently, a lot of them, and started pulling apart the places it lived in, the old trees, the springs, the ground under the moss. It had been moving for days. How did it even get in? Hannah asked. Nothing has come through the entrance. Dungeons were open to anything without a body, Victor said. Walls were for meat. Hers had nothing at the door yet. Lots of us are coming, the spirit added, delighted. Everybody's interested. It's quiet, and nobody cuts anything down. She asked how many. The spirit did not have a number. It had a gesture, which involved spinning, and which Hannah read as more than she had room for. Victor lifted one shoulder. Make them a sanctuary then? Yes, Hannah said, before she had worked out what a sanctuary was. A sanctuary was holy ground, Victor said. Spirits could live on it without thinning out. The air over it came clean, and things grew there that grew nowhere else. The spirit spun fast enough that Garm's head went round with it. The simplest way to make one is a world tree. Remus asked what a world tree was. There had been one at the center of the demon forest, Victor said. It withered 300 years ago. Nobody had seen another since. Hannah put her cup down. She had said yes to a small glowing thing in front of its whole future, and the price of that yes was a species 3 centuries dead. So we can't. You made 99 floors out of a hole in the ground. Remus admitted he had never seen one and could offer no guidance. Hannah opened the creation panel anyway. It made what she could hold clearly in her head, and she had never once seen the thing she was being asked to hold. She turned to the spirit. Describe it to me, all of it. Don't leave anything out because you think it's obvious. The spirit described it, taller than the forest, so the forest was a floor to it, wide enough that the light underneath came through green. Ground beneath it that never went cold, not in any winter, not once. And when it drank, the rain came back to the whole forest for years. Hannah held all of it the way she used to hold a dish she had eaten once in a restaurant and meant to rebuild in her own kitchen from memory, taste by taste. A seed appeared on the panel. She had not pressed anything. It was brown, deeply ridged, the size of a plum, and warm when she picked it up, which nothing on the panel had ever been. Remus leaned in and said it was a seed. Victor did not lean in at all. That's it, he said. The spirit made a sound Hannah felt in her back teeth. She chose floor 90 because it was still bare rock, and a tree that size would need a floor with nothing else on it. She built the floor around them while they stood there. Rock went to soil. Trees came up in stands with room between them. A spring opened at the high end and ran downhill until it found the channel she had cut for it, and then it was a river with a sound. Last she put in the sky and set it to noon. Remus said the terrain load should have taken a guild a month. It took under an hour, and he stopped when she looked at him. The hill was in the middle, low and grassed, about the size of a house. Hannah walked up it, knelt, and dug the hole with her hands, because the panel would have made a hole, and she did not want the panel to make this one. She put the seed in, covered it, and pressed it flat with both palms, twice. Then she sat back on her heels, and nobody said anything at all. The spirit went up, flew 3 wide circles over the hill, came down, and told her it would look after the seed every day, personally, and that she was to come and see it whenever she liked, and never had to ask first. Then it came in close and touched her forehead. It was cold, like the underside of a leaf. Thank you, Hannah said. The spirit said thank you back, much louder. Garm lay down at the bottom of the hill and did not move until she came down. Victor stopped her at the corner. Check your status. There was a line under her skills that had not been there at dinner, Spirit's Protection, and under the titles, beneath all the ones she had earned by accident, a new one, Lord of the World Tree. Hannah read it twice. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot. He was not doing the flat amused thing he did. Never show that screen to another human. Not one. Not ever. Not if they are dying in front of you. She said she wouldn't. It was an easy promise. There was not one other human on this continent who would look at her long enough to read it. 300 knights of the Rodney Kingdom came out of the trees before the village was properly awake and stopped in a ring around it. There was no wall to stop at. The houses were built into standing trees. A stream ran through the middle. Herbs dried on open racks. And the women carrying water put the water down. Douglas Harrow stood at the head of the column with his helmet under his arm. An elf came out to meet him, young, thin, bow already drawn, the point of the arrow level with Douglas's face. My name is Andrew. I speak for this village. State your business. The kingdom sent a letter. We refused the letter. The letter had asked for the village's young, every elf of fighting age, handed over to the kingdom's army for the war against the demon lord. It used the word alliance twice. It had now been delivered a second time by 300 armed men, which is what an invitation looks like when it is not one. The demon lord is coming for every people on this continent, Douglas said. Standing against him is the duty of all of them. He said it the way a man reads a line off a page he did not write. The bow did not move. Humans made wars against each other, Andrew told him. And when they got tired of them, they walked into the forest and asked elves to hold the front. He lowered his voice and did not lower the bow. You want our young because they hold contracts with the spirits. Say that much out loud, at least. The order had come from the crown prince. He had wanted the elves for years, and the summoning that was supposed to hand him an easier war had produced nothing he thought worth keeping, so the date moved forward. There was a second order folded in the pouch at Douglas's belt, written in his own hand. If the village refused, take it and bring its people out of the forest under guard, entered on the kingdom's rolls as enemies of humanity, so the Bastion Empire could never have them. You have 3 days, Douglas said. Nobody in the village answered. He turned his back on all of it and walked in through his own men, and he could feel what was behind him the whole way. Halfway to the tree line, he stopped. 3 days is a long time, he said to nobody, without turning round. The forest is wide. Then he kept walking. 4 nights later, the floor moved, once hard from underneath. 2 of the 6 glasses walked to the edge of the counter, and 1 went over. Garm was up and barking at the ceiling. Victor stood without any sound at all, turning his head slowly, reading something none of them could feel. It stopped after a few seconds. Nothing was broken but the glass. Then Remus came down the hallway at a speed that was not a butler's. Magic that did not belong to the master, he said, was spreading through the dungeon. Not a floor, the dungeon. It had covered more ground in the time it took him to walk to her. Hannah pulled up the cameras. 99 floors of them. Every corridor exactly as she had left it. Where's it thickest? Floor 90. She got an arm under Garm, who was far too big for that now, and took him through the portal anyway. She came out of the portal facing the hill, kept tipping her head back, and it kept not being enough. The hill was gone. The roots had taken it. They came out of the ground in ridges taller than she was and ran off into the trees. And where they crossed the river went under them and came out the other side. The trunk was wider than her whole apartment floor. The bark ran up it in gray ropes. The first branch started above where a ceiling should have been, and there was no ceiling, only her sky, and the tree went up through it and kept going. She could not find the top of it. Hannah, hey! The spirit came down at her fast, and it was not alone anymore. The air over the water was full of small lights, dozens of them, some white and some the color of a candle. It was the seed, the spirit told her, very pleased with itself. It had looked after it exactly as promised, and the light spirits and the water spirits had lent it everything they had, and more arrived every day and lent it more. It's been 4 days. It likes it here, and the thing Remus had felt was the roots. The tree had worked out that the dungeon was its home, so it had put roots through all of it, every floor, top to bottom, to keep the home safe. Hannah repeated that out loud for the 2 of them. Remus went quiet, then did the arithmetic out loud. The protection was not hers. It belonged to the tree. It covered all 99 floors, and nothing was going to force its way down through it. Not even, he said, a dragon of the size that came through your ceiling. Victor's eyebrow went up. Don't, Hannah said, without looking at him. She tipped her head back one more time until the light went white and she still could not find the top of it. This might be the safest place in the world, she said. Nobody in the clearing disagreed. She had said it out loud, though. In her experience, the things she said out loud got tested. The test came 2 nights later, through the bedroom door. "Master, intruders." Hannah got one eye open. Garm was lying across her legs, which was how he had slept since he stopped fitting in her lap, and his head came up before hers did. "A thief?" Remus said it did not look like a thief, and she had better come and see. Garm was already off the bed with his ears forward. Nothing had ever come into the dungeon. She had built 99 floors and never once built a door on the front of it. She found her socks and went. The monitors were showing floor 3, and floor 3 was full of people. A young man at the front with a thin sword held low. Behind him, women carrying children, children carrying smaller children, and half a dozen old ones at the back. One bow between all of them, no armor. "Elves," Victor said over her shoulder, eating something. Remus had conclusions. They were not mapping, they were not opening anything, and twice they had backed out of a corridor with something living in it. "They're not hunting." "No, master, they're hiding." The column reached a dead end and stopped. They sat down all at once, in the way people sit when the walking has finally run out. Then, the dark at the edge of the picture moved. The centipedes came out of rock she had zoned herself. The young man got in front of his people. He was fast, and he was not good. His sword skidded away over the stone, and he went after the thing anyway with nothing in his hands. "He'll die," Victor said, without any particular interest. "The weak die in dungeons. That is what a dungeon is." Hannah stood in her socks in her own security room and understood what her bathtub was made of. She turned for the door. Victor asked why she was not sending him. "Because they'd take one look at you and run into the dark. I don't want them rescued. I want them met." She stepped into the portal alone. She came out of the portal 100 paces from the screaming and ran toward it, which she would think about later. One centipede down and not moving. 2 elves on the ground with others holding them, and the young man in the middle of it, sword back in his hands, blood on his sleeve, turning at the sound of her. The point came up level with her chest. "Who are you?" "Wait." He shifted his grip on the hilt. "Who are you?" Behind him, the 2 live centipedes came out of the dark, and Hannah had 1 full second to be more frightened than she had ever been. They went past the elves entirely. They came around her in a wide half circle, put themselves between her and the sword, and stopped there, facing him. She had not lifted a hand. Nobody had said a word to them. The young man's face settled on the worst answer available. He called her a monster tamer, the way people say a diagnosis. "I'm not. I don't even know what that is." He asked what else she wanted to call it. Something white came down the corridor at a dead run and landed between her and the sword with its lip up off its teeth. "A demon wolf," one of the elves said, which settled it. Victor came out of the dark behind her, unhurried. He looked at the sword, then at the man holding it. "That one put a blade on you. He's frightened." Hannah, flat, patient, waiting for an instruction. "Do you want these dead?" The corridor stopped. It was not a joke. That was what she understood in the 2 seconds after, with a wolf braced against her shin. He had asked it the way a man asks whether to put the kettle on. Behind her, a woman pulled a child's face into her shoulder. One of the old ones started to stand and was pulled back down by the sleeve. Andrew's sword arm did not move because Andrew had stopped being able to move. Victor waited. He would have waited all night. "No," Hannah said. "Absolutely not." Then she turned her back on the sword entirely and went at Victor in front of every one of them. Not one of them. You do not say that in front of children, and you do not say it about people who have been running for 3 nights. They started it. They are children, Victor. He stepped back 1 pace, folded his arms, and stopped looking at her, which was how he intended to spend the next few days. The young man was no longer frightened of the centipedes at all. "My name is Hannah. Will you listen to me?" He swallowed, lowered the sword, and nodded. She made 2 lanterns and a stack of blankets out of the air while they watched, which did not help her case. The wounded got the blankets. Then she sat down on the floor with them, which surprised them more than the lanterns. "I'm Hannah. I'm the master of this dungeon." They looked at the sweater and the house socks, and the arithmetic failed on every face in the room. The young man gave his name as Andrew and spoke for his village. They had left it 3 nights ago in the dark, taking everyone who could not fight. Left it why? A boy of about 10 was on his feet before Andrew could answer, shouting that it was the Rodney Kingdom, all of it, and a woman pulled him back down. Andrew gave her the rest evenly. "The crown says the demon lord is coming. It wants every elf of fighting age for its army, and it sent 300 men to ask politely. His people would not be counters on a board between the Rodney Kingdom and the Bastion Empire, so they went into the forest instead." Victor supplied the part Andrew would not. Elves hold contracts with spirits. That is the power the crown actually wants. "We saw spirits coming in here," Andrew said. "Hundreds, for days. We followed them. They had not found one. The spirits were 90 floors down, and the elves had not got past the 3rd. Hannah had gone quiet somewhere around the word Rodney. She was looking at the wall. Then she stood up. "Follow me." They came out of the portal into noon. Nobody moved. An old woman sat down in the grass and put both hands over her mouth. Somebody said the words "world tree" out loud. A spirit came down at Hannah fast and asked whether the elves were with her today. "They are. Be nice." Andrew had frozen with 1 foot off the ground. "You answered it. It asked me a question." His people, he told her, have lived beside spirits for thousands of years. They sense them. They contract with them. Not one elf who ever lived has heard one speak. Hannah changed the subject at speed. "Floors 81 to 90, all 10. Forest, water, sky, the tree. It's yours." Andrew asked what she wanted for it. "Nothing. It's vacant land." He asked whether he might bring the rest of the village, the ones who had stayed to argue with the knights, and she said yes before he finished. Rimus came through the portal and asked for a word, in the voice he kept for unpleasant ones. "Every one of them," he said quietly, "now knows where the master sleeps and what she can make out of nothing. If the kingdom ever takes one of them, it takes all of that out of them as well. And there is no version of that day where it does not." "I know." He waited. "I know, Rimus." "Then I will begin planning for it," he said, and went to make room for 400 people. The camp went up in 2 days. Then Remus found the second group on the monitors. Every working age adult the village had, coming in fast and looking behind them. She met them at the mouth of the dungeon and brought them down herself. The old chief got to the top of the rise, saw his son standing under the tree, and could not speak at all. Then 400 people went down on the ground in front of her. "Please get up." They did not. "Please, I had vacant land. You needed land. That's the whole of it." Garm sat on her foot, and she put a hand in his ruff and held on. "Right," she said, to nobody helpful. "Barbecue." Not one elf there knew what that word meant. She went to build it. Elves learn tongs in about 4 minutes. By full dark, there were grills the length of the riverbank, and Garm was begging from a woman who had been terrified of him on the 3rd floor. Victor ate alone at the edge of the light and still would not look at Hannah. Hannah grilled beef for a wolf with tremendous concentration. Then the old chief sat down beside her and asked gently what her own circumstances were. The nearest fire went quiet. Then the one past it. "They summoned me," Hannah said. "The crown prince of the Rodney kingdom pulled me out of my world into a hall full of people who were extremely pleased with themselves. Then they read what I could do, and it was not what they had ordered." Nobody moved. "So they gave me to a knight and told him to walk me out into the demon forest. He was supposed to kill me there." She turned the meat over. "He didn't. He cut a piece of my hair off to carry back instead, so somebody would believe him, and left me in the rain." She touched the short place at her jaw without noticing she had done it. Andrew worked it out aloud. That was why she had taken them in. "Partly. Hear the rest, since you're living in my house now." She looked around at 400 people who had run from the same crown she had. "I'm not going after them. I don't want the kingdom. I don't want an apology. I don't want a war. They can keep the whole country. I have 99 floors and a river and a tree. And what I want is to be left alone to cook dinner." Then somebody passed her a plate, and the fires got loud again. Victor came back into the light and held something out at her, straight-armed, like a man handing over evidence. "What's that?" "It is a flower. Human men," he explained, "give flowers to women." He had read it in a book. It seemed wrong to give her one out of her own dungeon, so he had gone a very long way for it, and picked this one because it was the hardest thing to find that he knew of. That was his entire theory of gifts. Hannah, a good deal less angry by then, took it. The flower bit her. She yelped. Garm came up barking. The elves nearest the fire did not laugh, only because they were not sure they were allowed. "It bit me. Victor, it has teeth." He had picked a young one, he said, so it could not take the finger off. He appeared to consider this the thoughtful part. Then the old chief was on his feet. He crossed to them, went down on one knee, looked at the thing in her hand without touching it, and said it was an everbloom. The elves around the fire stood up. "It grows in one place in the world," he said, "guarded, and one of them will take any sickness out of any body." Nobody in 3 generations of his people had seen one. Most had decided it was gone from the world. Every elf in earshot turned to look at Victor, who allowed himself an expression for the first time all day. Hannah looked at the flower. The flower, in her opinion, looked back. She carried it home in a paper cup and stood it on the kitchen counter, well back from the edge, where it sat with its mouth shut like it was thinking something over. Nobody in the dungeon had the first idea what it was for. She fed it a scrap of beef and went to bed. The knights came back from the elf village with nothing, and somebody had to say so out loud. Douglas Harrow said it. The village was empty. No people, no animals. Cold ash in every hearth. The Crown Prince asked him to say it again. He said it again. Elliot's fist came down on the arm of the throne. They had been too lenient, he told the room. They should never have offered a village of elves a choice. Now the knights would find them, if it meant going through the grass by the roots. Then he said the part he was not supposed to say, in front of 11 of his own men, and did not appear to notice. The Bastion Empire would make the same offer within the year, and whoever held the elves held elven magic. The Demon Lord had been a convenient thing to fear. Douglas bowed and told him he was sorry. He had a great deal of practice at that sentence. The crown had spent lives it never entered in any ledger to open a door into another world. What came through it was a woman in a gray suit they handed to Douglas with an order. He had left her standing in the demon forest in the rain. The lock of hair he cut off to prove it was still in his left glove. He could not remember her voice. He remembered her eyes. The knights went out with heavy footsteps. Douglas kept his face turned from the throne until the doors shut. 99 floors under a different forest. Garm came off his morning patrol and woke Hannah by standing on her. He did it every day. Remus watched the whole dungeon from the control room, and Garm had heard that argument and remained unconvinced. Both front paws on the ribs, then the shaking. All right, I'm up. Get off. Breakfast was the point of the exercise. She made an omelet, sausages, salad, soup, and toast, and knew when the sausages were done without looking at them, which was new and which she had decided not to think about. The plate looked plain, so she made ketchup. Garm went backward the instant the red hit it, ears flat, one paw up. It's a seasoning. It's tomatoes. Nobody has bled on anything. He sniffed the bottle, licked it, decided it was food, and stopped worrying about the philosophy of it. The bottle had two caps, a wide one for pouring and a fine one for lines. She drew a flower on his omelet with the fine one. Garm barked hard enough to rattle the cupboard, then ate around it so it would last. Victor came in barefoot, watched all of this, and reached for the bottle. Not that he had taken the whole screw top off. The flower arrived as one flat red sheet across his eggs, his hand and his chin. He looked at it, then at her, waiting to be told what had gone wrong. Hannah put her head down on the counter and laughed until her tea went cold. Remus came up from the control room while she was pouring the second pot of tea and waited to be asked. A human had come to the entrance in the night. Did he come in? He did not, master. He stood in the mouth of it with a lamp, looked down the first stair, and went back the way he came. Victor put his cup down. They should have made certain he could not tell anyone, he said, in the voice of a man observing that the tea needed more water. No, Remus said, to Victor, rather than to her, that this was precisely why nothing had been done. Then he goes home and he talks. Victor turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. Then his friends come, then men with maps. Then they come every week for the rest of your life. She had thought about it since the second floor was finished. They can leave, any of them, anytime. If they turn around, nothing follows them out. That's the rule, and it isn't changing. And the ones who do not turn around? She did not answer, which was an answer. You are too soft, Hannah. He picked the cup back up. People are going to start dying in your house. She washed the plates and thought about her own floors. There had been dragons on floor 67 for months, and she had never gone up to say hello. 2 days later, she made a gift. It came out of the air the way everything did. A block of beef the size of a coffee table, wrapped in white paper, in a bag she needed both arms for. Garm came straight up onto his back legs. Not yours. Sorry, it's a present. His ears went flat down the back of his head. Steak tonight. A whole one. Just you. The tale started again. Floor 67 arrived around them between one step and the next. Bare red mountain in every direction. Under a sky she had specified herself and never stood beneath. She had named this place the Land of Death from her kitchen floor with a mug of tea. It looked more serious in person. Shapes turned in the air over the ridge. 4 of them, each with a wingspan longer than the building she used to live in. One peeled off and came down. Blue the way a beetle's back is blue, plates sliding over one another as he folded onto the rock in front of her. His voice arrived in her head low and formal, like a man asking whether the seat beside her was taken. He asked if she was the master here. I'm Hannah, she bowed. Sorry it took me so long to come up. The blue dragon did not move for several seconds. Then he asked very carefully whether she was understanding his words. Yes? Nothing has ever understood me. She held the bag out and said she had brought a greeting present, since it seemed rude to arrive empty-handed. He took it in one claw with enormous care, thanked her, and bowed. head down, the whole front of him low against the stone. So she bowed back. Then he bowed again, because that is what happens, and she was suddenly and stupidly happy. It was the first thing since the summoning that had gone the way things went at home. Then, Garm's ears went flat. Something came over the ridge fast and low, screaming. It was red, bright red, the red of a warning sign. It was not slowing down, and what it screamed was that it was going to take the dungeon master down. Hannah did not move. That was the entirety of her contribution. She stood in the open holding an empty bag. Garm moved. He put himself in front of her, and then he got bigger. He went past the size of a horse in the time it took her to breathe in, past a cart, past anything she had a word for, white fur rising like a field going over in wind, until the wolf between her and the sky was larger than an elephant. She had him since he fit in 2 hands. She had never seen him do that. He had never told her he could. Then he told her to run. Not in words. It came the way the blue dragon's voice had, flat and urgent and completely his. Hide somewhere. Hurry. She ran. She went across broken rock with her arms out, went down once on her hands, got up, and behind her the two of them met, and the noise came up through the soles of her feet. Then something else spoke to her. It was on her left, half sunk in the slope, twice her height, gray, cracked across the top. It said it could take 1 strike. It told her to get behind it. She did not stop to consider that a rock had opinions. She got behind it and slid down onto the stone. Her hands would not stay still. She pressed them flat on her knees, and they went on shaking anyway. She had believed, right up until something came over that ridge, that nothing in her own house could want her dead. Victor was king of all of them, and Victor lived in her kitchen. Not all of them answered to Victor. She learned it sitting in the dirt behind a rock, at the worst possible moment. The blue dragon put himself in the way. She heard him say it, the king's own command, madness to go against it, and he did not get to finish. There was a sound like a door slamming in a building with no doors. Then he was down. The red one shouted that it was finished taking orders. If it held this dungeon, it would be king itself. Then it hit the boulder. The rock kept its word. It held for exactly as long as it had said it would. Then the crack ran up through the middle, and the whole thing came apart into gravel and dust, and she was on her hands and knees in the open with grit in her teeth. When the dust thinned, she could see Garm. He was lying against the base of the slope where the strike had put him, enormous and white and still. He was not getting up. She said his name. One ear moved. That was everything he had. The red dragon crossed the ground between them without hurrying. It told her what a waste this was. 99 floors, a place like this, and a weak human sitting on top of it. It was taking all of it now. Then it lowered its head and opened its mouth over her, and Hannah looked at Garm instead, because she did not want the last thing to be a dragon. A shadow came down across all of it. The wind hit her flat. She got an arm up across her face, and when she brought it down, the red dragon was gone from where it had been standing. It was in the rock wall on the far side of the valley, buried to the shoulders in stone that had not had a hole in it a second earlier. Victor filled the sky she had built. She had seen that shape once before, coming down through her ceiling. It had been funny then. He offered the red dragon its last words. He offered them politely, which was the part that frightened her. Hannah did not watch. She was already running the other way. Garm's head was on the ground, and the rest of him went on for longer than she could take in. She got both arms around as much of his neck as she could reach, which was not much of it. He opened one eye, found her, and his tail moved. Once. It dragged a line through the dust. Don't do that. You don't have to do that right now. The tail moved again. She cried with her face in his fur and told him it was her fault. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had not called Victor before she took one step onto this floor, because she had wanted to bring the neighbors a present by herself. Behind her, the noise stopped. She did not turn around to see how. The red one used his last words to surrender. 2 young men came across the broken ground and went down on their faces in front of her. One was all shoulders and bad temper, with hair the color of the scales he had been wearing 5 minutes earlier. The other was taller, quieter, and bowed lower. They apologized. The red one, the way a man does when the alternative has just been demonstrated. Hannah was still sitting in the dirt with a wolf the size of a barn breathing against her leg. You can stay. Victor's head came around. She kept going anyway. She had built this floor for dragons and was not throwing anybody out of a house she made for them. The terms were short. No more trying to kill her. No more deciding the dungeon had a new owner. This is naive, Victor said. Probably. She wiped her face with the back of a dusty hand, which did not improve anything. There's a man out there right now telling people where my front door is. In a month, there'll be 100 of him. I have no defenses of my own. What I have is 2 dragons. Victor did not agree. He also did not overrule her, which was as close to agreement as he came. Then the red one asked it, still on his knees, out loud in front of everybody, because he did not understand and was not clever enough to keep it behind his teeth. Why did the king of dragons care this much about one weak human when he could kill her himself and take the whole dungeon? The king surely has his reasons, the blue one said quickly, into the ground. Victor did not raise his voice. When Victor was actually angry, he went quieter, and he was very quiet now. It is nothing that complicated. Hannah is irreplaceable. Anyone who harms her will be annihilated entirely. Nobody said anything. The blue one had his forehead flat on the rock. The red one had stopped moving at all. The dust that was still coming down came down. Garm breathed against her leg. Hannah worked out what he meant because he had to mean something sensible. Somebody had to run the dungeon, and she was the one who could make the food and the floors and the water. That was the shape it fit, so she put it there. She did not ask him. He did not say anything else. She moved Garm down to floor 99 herself, which took most of what she had. Remus met them and said he was glad she was safe, then said it again in slightly different words, which from Remus was hysteria. The old chief came down from floor 90 with 2 of his people and stayed all afternoon, hands flat on the white fur. By evening, Garm was back to his own size, asleep against the cabinets, with a pale line through the fur across his chest that had not been there in the morning. The chief said it would stay. Victor stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms folded and pointed out that she had gone up there alone. I know, he said his heart had gone cold when Remus called him. He said it flatly, as a fact about his own body. I couldn't do anything. She was still sitting on the floor. I stood there. I hid behind a rock and a wolf did all of it. Victor asked her what she was. She did not answer. You are the dungeon master. You can make monsters. You have never made one. She opened her mouth and shut it again. It had never once occurred to her. She had made lanterns and blankets and ketchup and 99 floors of forest and river and sky, and nothing that could stand in front of her. Remus added, from the doorway, that monsters could be taken outside with a little magic, and anybody who saw her with one would assume she was a tamer. Hannah looked at Remus for a while. Victor was not finished. If she went anywhere, any floor, any door, anywhere at all, she told him first. That's not really, say it. I'll tell you first, she said. I promise. Garm slept through all of it. She sat down on the floor beside him, put her hand in the fur behind his ear, well away from the new line, and did not go to bed. Garm had worked out how to make himself smaller. Nobody had explained that one either. He had simply started arriving at the bed each night at the size of a large dog instead of a wolf that took up 2/3 of it, and she had stopped waiting for anyone to explain. He turned twice, dropped, and put his chin across her arm. The lamp caught the line in his fur, running across his chest a shade paler than the white around it. It had not faded at all in the 9 days since the elves finished with him. The chief had said it would stay. It had stayed. A week ago, she would have made a joke about it, something about him showing off. She put her hand down near it and said nothing. She had gone up to floor 67 alone because she wanted to say hello to somebody. That was the entire reason there was a line in his fur. There were dozens of them in her dungeon now. They came in small, careful parties and went slowly. On the 3rd screen from the left, a man knelt in a corridor with a board on his knees, drawing the corner he had just walked around. It had never occurred to her that maps had to be made by somebody. The deepest party reached the 16th floor yesterday, Remus told her. She had started counting the floors between the 16th and the dragons. On the 7th, a party found one of the big snakes, and the fight went wrong. She made herself watch it. 2 hands came over her eyes from behind. That is more than you need, Victor said. Remus had already changed the display. When the hands came off, the screen showed an empty stairwell on the 4th, and Remus reported that the party from the 7th was hurt and retreating, and none of them dead. She let herself be handled, because the alternative was seeing it. I could just close the door, she said. He had answered that before, the same way. A dungeon nobody can enter stops being a dungeon and becomes a question, and questions bring men with maps and orders behind them. So she kept her rule instead. Nothing in her house pursued anyone. Anyone who turned around walked out. She had been telling herself for weeks that this was enough. A long way from any of it, in the free city of Crossford, 3 women were trying to buy a man a drink, and he would not let them. His name was Jeremy, tall, blonde, blue eyes. He had spent 4 days helping their party finish a job too big for them, and was insisting they had done it themselves, and he had only lent a hand. They asked whether he would come to the Rodney Kingdom with them next, where a request was paying more than anything on the board here. His smile caught, for about half a second, on the word Rodney. Then it came back, and he said he would stay in Crossford a while. They left disappointed, promising him a next time. At a table by the wall, a big man watched all of it and said something sour into his cup. The one beside him had a scar down his cheek and had been a thief before he was an adventurer, and he had an idea. He tapped a notice that had gone up the day before, an unexplored dungeon out in the demon forest. Nobody had mapped it. In a place like that, he pointed out, anything at all could happen to a man. Then they called Jeremy over and asked whether he would help them with a request. He came over smiling. Lunch was rice under a thin sheet of egg, because the folded kind kept splitting on her. Remus took the brown sauce. Victor wanted the red. She offered to draw on his. I will do it myself. He closed his hand on the bottle the way he closed his hand on everything, and put most of it across the plate, the table, his own hand, and his chin. Then he sat looking down at it with a completely serious face and asked of nobody why he could not do this. Hannah laughed. It came out rusty and too loud, and it was the first time in 9 days. Payment arrived at once. Victor had put the cap back on hard enough to fuse it, so when she squeezed her own bottle, the whole top came away and laid a wide red sheet down the front of her sweater. Huh, Victor said, and went back to eating. She said she would change after lunch. She did not, because Remus came in with the afternoon report, and it opened with the lead party reaching the 19th floor and went on, more carefully, to the fact that they did not appear to be working together. 4 of them hanging back, one of them taking everything. The screen showed a ruined corridor on the 19th and 5 men in it, 4 big ones hanging back in a clump. Ahead of them, alone, a blonde man checking every doorway before he let the others past. Remus explained the hollow they were walking toward. Mad mushrooms, plant monsters with almost no fight in them, which released spores that did things to a person's head. The field was off the main route. There was no reason to be near it. The blonde man reached the edge, stopped, and looked at what was growing in there. He knew what it was. He turned around to wave the others back. All 4 of them put their hands on him and pushed. They did not run. They stood at the lip of the hollow and watched, and one of them was laughing so hard he had to lean on the wall. Hannah was already on her feet. Something about his face snagged at her on the way past, and there was no time to work out what. I'm going down. Victor let out a long breath through his nose and did not move to stop her. Then Remus was at her elbow, holding out a plain white mask. He did not explain it. He did not call it anything. She looked at it for 1 second, took it, and put it on. She whistled for Garm, and the room went away. The laughing was the first thing she heard. They were up the passage with their backs to her. Past them, in the hollow, the blonde man was down among the mushrooms. He was badly hurt, and the spores were already in him. She made herself stop looking at him and look at the 4 men instead. One of them noticed her, came down the passage unhurried, and told her to move the animal. Garm stepped in front of her legs. The man kicked him. Garm grew. It went up through him in one long shrug, past the man's shoulder, past the doorway behind him, until his back was in the dark near the ceiling, and his shadow covered all 4 of them. He put his mouth around the man's arm and closed it, and the gauntlet came apart like a dropped cup. And then he opened his mouth and set the man down on his feet. The arm inside the gauntlet was fine. That was the part that finished them. They looked properly, then, at what they had been shouting at. An enormous white wolf, and behind him a small woman standing very still in a blank white mask with red all down her front. One of them found a word for it and used it at the top of his voice. Witch. A witch living in the dungeon. They went over each other getting out of the passage, and the last one was screaming at the others to wait for him. She let them go. Every monster on that floor belonged to her. She did not call a single one. Witch, said a voice behind her, delighted. Don't. Sorry. Victor came up beside her, entirely unrepentant. Lady Witch. He had been 3 steps behind her since floor 67. She had noticed weeks ago and never mentioned it. She stepped down into the hollow, and the mushrooms closed. The first one folded its cap flat as she came level with it. Then the one behind it, then the 2 beyond that, and then the whole field going down ahead of her in a slow wave, everyone shutting itself so nothing came off them while she walked through. She had not asked. She had not said a word out loud since the mask went on. Don't touch him, she told Garm, and Garm stopped where he was. The blonde man heard her. He got up onto one knee before she was halfway across, and there was nothing behind his eyes but the spores. He was growling. His weight was going forward onto his hand. Hannah knelt a little further away than he could reach. I'm not going to hurt you. He did not move. I saw what they did. She kept her hands where he could see them. All of it. I'm not with them. The growl thinned out. I'm here to treat you. That's the only reason I came down. You stay where you are, and I'll stay where I am. Something came back behind his eyes. It came back badly and late, but it came back. His hand lifted off the ground, and he looked at the white mask and got one question out of himself. You are. Then he went over sideways and did not get up. The sanctuary, Victor said from the lip of the hollow. The elves are there. So is the tree. Garm lowered himself all the way to the stone. Between them, they got the man onto his back, and Garm stood up like he was carrying an egg across a marble floor. They arrived in the middle of the village, and Hannah was shouting for help before her feet were properly under her. What the elves saw was a wolf the size of a house with a body on its back, and beside it, a masked figure covered in red, shouting. A woman picked up 2 children without checking whose they were. Andrew came through the crowd with one arm out to hold his people behind him, saw the mask, and took a step backward himself before he could stop it. Victor reached over and lifted the mask off her face. Andrew's expression came apart. He said her name, turned, and shouted for someone to get his father, and the whole clearing changed direction. An older elf woman reached her first and asked very gently where she was hurt. Hannah looked down at the front of her sweater and remembered. It's tomatoes. Nobody moved. It's tomatoes. It's from lunch. Please get the chief. The chief crossed that grass faster than a man of his age had any business moving. Healing magic is rare among elves, and in that village, he was the only one who had it. He knelt with his hands over the man and worked without speaking for a long time, and when he sat back, the worst of it was closed. The man had lost a great deal, he said, and would need sleep and food worth eating. Remus had once pointed out that 400 people knew where she slept. She had just made it 401 on purpose, in front of witnesses. He came around slowly, and before he asked where he was or what had happened, he asked whether she was the one who had helped him. Hannah said she supposed she was. Then he told them what it had been like, and her stomach went cold a third of the way through. He remembered the push, the spores going into him, everything coming loose after that, his own name getting away from him. And then, he said, there was a voice, not in the room. Nobody was in the room. Somebody had been talking to him the whole time he was losing himself, telling him to hold on, telling him he was not going to be left there. He had hung off that voice, and it was the only reason there was anything left of him when the wolf came down the passage. He looked at her and said it had been her voice. He would know it anywhere. She had been 80 floors below him in a dark room, watching a screen, and she had not opened her mouth once. Victor looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. Then he took both her hands in his and thanked her properly, his face about a foot from hers, and every word Hannah had ever learned left her at once. Victor slapped his hands off hers and stood over the bed until he let go. He apologized and gave his name, Jeremy. Then he actually looked around. New timber, an elf in the doorway with a staff, a window with nothing in it but green. Where is this? She opened her mouth to invent something and looked at him properly for the first time in good light. Blonde hair, blue eyes, that jaw. The way the mouth sat when it was doing nothing at all. She had knelt in a palace hall with that face above her while it decided out loud that she was worthless. She had been trying not to think about it every day since. The man in the bed looked like Elliot Rodney. She did not answer the question. He waited for it, perfectly polite, eyebrows up. Every answer Hannah had was either a lie he would catch inside a day or the truth. Victor answered instead. Nobody was going anywhere, he said, and they would all be sitting in the front room in 10 minutes. The chief sent Andrew out for lamps. Garm got up off her feet, shook himself out at the size of a large dog, and followed her. Remus was 9 floors down on the monitors and had not been called up. Hannah could hear him anyway. The man had seen the world tree, the elves, and the inside of a house, and there was only one way to take those back. He came in on his own feet, in a borrowed elf shirt that fitted him nowhere, and bowed from the waist, deeply, and held it, and thanked them for the rescue and the healing. I am Jeremy, an adventurer. Victor had his chair angled back, and one bare foot on the edge of the table. A dead man doesn't need a name. He did not mean it, and knowing that made it worse to sit through, not better. Jeremy took it without a flicker. Somebody spent a healer on me for most of an hour, he pointed out. People rarely do that to a man they intend to kill afterward. The chief cleared his throat and said the healing had been his own work, and that he could hardly have refused when he stopped. Victor had turned his head. When she asked, the chief finished. One syllable. Jeremy's eyes moved to Hannah and stayed half a second longer than they needed to, and the half second cost them more than the syllable had. Victor put his foot down and told him he would be put out of the forest at first light. Out. Jeremy looked at the window with nothing in it but green, and then at the ceiling beams. Not away. Out. Then, mildly. This is inside a dungeon. Nobody said anything for long enough that it stopped being a question. There. Victor spread a hand at him. That is the job. He goes up and he sells it. Jeremy did not deny it. He had come on a guild contract out of Crossford, an unexplored dungeon in the Demon Forest, reconnaissance and mapping. 4 men hired to carry the load. Saying it out loud in that room did him no good, and he said it anyway. The chief spoke to the table rather than to anyone at it. Rescuing him had been a mistake. Hannah asked the question nobody else had bothered with. Why did your own party do it? He took a moment. Women stand near me, he said. That is the whole of it. I have turned it over looking for the rest, and there is no rest. Victor made a low sound in his throat. Humans. Jeremy heard it. He said the word back into the room with no weight on it at all, and let it lie there. Nobody picked it up. Then he told them he had no intention of reporting anything to anybody, that if they could not believe it, he was content to die on this floor, and that otherwise he would go back to moving from town to town, which he had done for years and could keep doing. Nobody arrives at that sentence quickly. Hannah put both hands flat on the table. My name is Hannah. Hannah! Victor did not raise his voice. He had gone completely still instead, which was the worst of his 2 settings. Don't. I was thrown out of the Rodney Kingdom a year ago. I came into the Demon Forest from that side with the clothes I had on and nothing else. Victor was on his feet. Stop talking. The chief made a small noise. Andrew looked at the floorboards. She had spent years in meeting rooms where everybody knew the true answer, and nobody would put it on the table first. She had always been the one who put it on the table, and it had never once been rewarded. So I am not handing you to anyone, she told him. Not the guild, not a kingdom. Tell me the truth about who you are, and you can stay here. Victor did not stop her. There was nothing in the world he could do about her mouth, and both of them knew it. Jeremy stood up. Then he went down on one knee on the chief's floorboards, set his right hand flat over his chest, and lowered his head. It was not the way a man kneels when he wants something. It was drilled. It came out of a court. To give a false name to the person who saved my life was an insult, he said. I apologize for it. Nobody in the room moved. My name is Jeremiah Rodney. My father wore the crown. My half-brother Ethelbert wears it now. 10 years ago, I was charged with a plot against him that I had no part in, stripped of everything, and put out of the kingdom. The chief sat down slowly, without appearing to notice. Then, Jeremiah lifted his head, looked straight at Hannah, and finished it. Elliot Rodney is my nephew. She had spent the whole afternoon telling herself she was imagining a jawline. She had not imagined it. She had only been out by 1 generation. Get up, she said. He stayed exactly where he was until she said it a second time. Then you should have the rest of mine, Hannah said. She gave it in order and did not decorate any of it. She had not been born in this world. There had been a circle cut into the floor of a hall in his family's palace, 100 people standing around the edge of it, and when the light went out, she was in the middle of it in her work clothes with her bag on her shoulder. The crown prince called her a hero for about 4 minutes. Then an old mage read her status out loud to the room, and there was one skill written on it, a translation skill, nothing else. He didn't shout, she said. Everyone expects shouting. He looked at the mage instead of at me and gave the order the way you would tell somebody to move a chair out of a doorway. Get rid of her, in front of the entire court. Not one person in that hall said a word. The knight commander who walked her out had been ordered to finish it in the forest. Douglas Harrow. He did not. He walked her out to the tree line, cut a lock of her hair to carry back as proof it was done, and left her standing in the rain. Her voice came off the rails on the last 4 words. Half a word, really. She heard it happen, pulled it back, and finished the sentence in the same flat tone she had started it in. Jeremiah watched it happen. She watched him watch it. He said nothing about it then, and nothing about it afterward, which she decided later was the first genuinely kind thing anyone in that family had done for her. Then he asked her to say the first part again. Not the forest, the circle. She said it again, summoned. That working is sealed. He had gone very pale. Not restricted. Sealed. It is on the short list of things the crown itself is forbidden to attempt, and the law that seals it is older than my family's claim to the throne. He did it anyway, in an open hall. He looked at the lamp. And what he did to you afterward was not exile. Exile is a document. There is a hearing, a sentence, a record, a signature, and a name written down. Mine is written down somewhere in that palace, and I can tell you which room. He walked you into the one place in that kingdom nothing walks back out of, and then he wrote nothing at all. That was an execution. He simply arranged never to have to sign one. Nobody in this world had ever said it out loud. Not Victor, who suspected. Not Remus, who had certainly worked it out. Not her. She had known it for a year and had been careful never to put it in a sentence, because a sentence can be repeated to yourself at 4 in the morning. Then Jeremiah asked what she wanted done about it. Nothing. He waited for the rest. There was no rest. I don't want the kingdom, Hannah said. I don't want an apology. I don't want anything given back to me, and I don't want anyone punished for it. I have 99 floors, a river, and a tree. They can keep everything else. He bowed his head and let it go. He had no standing to argue with her, and both of them knew precisely how little. He had one more question, and it was not about his nephew. He wanted to know what had spoken to him in the mushroom field. He had been made to learn magic law before he was allowed to ride, and he told them plainly that he knew of nothing, in any discipline, that reaches into a man's head from a distance and talks to him for an hour. Hannah told him she did not have an answer. Victor looked at the wall. Nobody filled the silence. Then Victor ended the meeting. The man could live in the sanctuary, floor 90 and no deeper, not a request and not open to discussion, and one step past it meant Victor would stop asking questions. The chief nodded. Andrew nodded. Nobody looked at Hannah to see whether she agreed. Victor stopped on the path and did not turn around. You gave a man with that surname your name, where you come from, how you got here, and what was done to you, he said. He gave you nothing first. You went first. She told him she knew what she was doing. You don't know what you're worth. Flat and quieter than the rest of it. That is the problem. You aren't careless. You genuinely do not know, and you keep handing pieces of it to whoever asks you politely. Hannah told him she was not stupid. He said he had not called her stupid and kept walking. She filed it as an insult and went to bed. For 3 days, Victor was polite to her, which was how she knew how bad it was. She found him behind a shut door inside a wall of pirate comics she had pulled out of her own memory, one volume at a time. The count somewhere in the 90s now. I'm angry, he said, when she sat down on the floor beside him. I've been reading, so I don't say it. Say it. So, he said it. The safest thing to do with any human who finds out what is under this forest is to kill them. Not most of them. Any of them. He did not dress it up, and then he waited. And the worst part of the next few seconds was that Hannah could not find the hole in it. She told him about where she grew up instead. Her country had given up war before she was born. Striking a person was a crime there, and everybody agreed it ought to be. She had reached her late 20s without ever hitting anyone or being hit. Victor said no country like that had ever existed. Then, into the comic, there is no dungeon master that soft. There's one right here. He did not concede it. He never said she was right, that night or any night after. What he said was that he had known since the first week he would end up handling that part himself because she was soft, and that he would go on handling it. That was not agreement. He had told her twice in 5 minutes that she was wrong. He had also told her he was not leaving over it, and Hannah understood the difference perfectly well and took the second one. Then he ruined it by remarking that he had assumed she spared the man because of his face. It was the resemblance, she said, not the face. He flicked her forehead and used a word for people who choose by looks that she was fairly sure did not exist in this world. When she asked where he got it, he tilted the spine of a comic at her without looking up. Jeremiah settled in faster than anyone had wanted him to. The chief had meat carried to his door for the first week, and by the end of it, he was going out with the hunting parties and carrying his own share back. The elves, who compliment nobody, allowed that his sword work was worth watching. He asked them all to drop the other name. The king's brother was a closed matter, he said. Jeremy would do. Hannah stood at the edge of the clearing and counted. 400 elves, hunted off their own land by the Rodney Kingdom's knights. One office worker, dumped in the demon forest by its crown prince, and now the king's own half-brother, splitting firewood under her tree. Her dungeon had started collecting the people that kingdom threw away. Nobody had planned it. Nobody had invited any of them. It had happened 3 times, and there was no reason at all to think it was finished. The report reached Elliot Rodney at his desk, and he read it twice. A giant dungeon in the demon forest. Scale unknown. 1 adventurer dead, 4 alive, and the 4 could describe nothing but a witch. Pressed for detail, the executive said they had given him a mask and a wolf. No face, no name. Elliot crushed the page in one hand. Adventurers were already assembled, the executive said, for the forest and for the missing elf village. Then they would do both, and the dungeon came first. When the man started a sentence about the elves, Elliot asked whether he would enjoy explaining to the court how a rival faction had taken an unclaimed dungeon. The executive apologized his way out. Then he turned to his attendant, and his voice dropped into the register men use for scheduling. The temple was to stop finding reasons and prepare the summoning he had ordered and never got. A ritual was performed only last year, Your Highness. The last one had produced nothing that could hold a weapon, he said. It did not count. This time, they would call other worlders with decent skills, and if the cost of the working ran short, the crown would take more. He did not say where from, his attendant did not ask. On the monitors, a party on the 4th floor argued about a map. Hannah watched them the way people watch other people's holidays. "I'm jealous," she said. Victor turned a page of his comic and asked what there was to be jealous of. "They get to go outside, so go outside." Remus made it official. A dungeon taken while its master is away goes to whoever takes it, which is why most masters never leave. The only thing on the continent capable of taking hers was on her sofa with his feet on the arm. Then he pressed a flat rectangle into her hands, a terminal, shaped like something she remembered, running item create and monster create anywhere in the world and useless to anybody else. "Contact me once a day," Remus said. "Tell me what happened and when you were coming home," she promised. She wanted Jeremy for a guide, the only one of them who had ever lived in a human town. Victor's eyebrows came down and stayed down. She had asked out loud for something she wanted, and 3 people had said yes. She turned that over the whole way up to floor 90. Jeremy had said yes on floor 90, after a pause long enough to be its own answer. 2 days later, a merchant wagon put them down outside Crossford, the free city every adventurer on the continent passes through, and Hannah stopped walking every 20 steps. A fruit shaped like a green fist she could not name. A man selling meat on a stick, which she had assumed was invented for television. "It is not that rare," Jeremy said, about all of it. Victor bought her the fruit. It was sour and full of seeds, and she ate all of it. Admirers swarmed Jeremy at the door, so Hannah went in alone. The clerk gave her a sheet and a quill. Name. She had thought about this on the wagon, Hannah Forrest. They had walked her out to the edge of the demon forest and left her there to be somebody else's problem, and she liked the idea of putting the place on a government form. Birthplace was a village Jeremy had picked for her. Class was tamer, which the clerk called rare, before pointing the quill at the white wolf against Hannah's knee. "Silver wolf," she wrote. The tale stopped. Garm looked up with an expression that needed no translating. He was not a silver wolf. He was considerably better than a silver wolf, and this was going on the permanent record. "He's my family," Hannah said. "So spell it properly." The clerk wrote the name out in careful letters. The tale had started again on the word family and did not stop. She stood up, pleased with herself, and 3 men stepped into her path, bald and small, enormous with a red nose, and an eye patch who did the talking. They wanted to teach the newcomer how things worked here, and it was not really an offer. Hannah declined, politely, then less politely. Garm growled, which got a laugh and a lecture about what C-rank men do to rude dogs. The bald one swung a kick at him, hit nothing, and sat down hard on the boards. The big one lunged and met the wall. Nobody stood up to help her, though half the hall was laughing by then. She told Garm to stop before somebody filed a complaint. The eye patch man stopped laughing and reached for the wolf. A voice crossed the room, not loud, asking what was going on. A glass hit the floor by the tavern. 60 adventurers stood holding their drinks at chest height while Victor walked at the 3 men with nothing on his face. "Victor," she got a hand on his sleeve. "They are not worth the paperwork." Jeremy came through the door, read the room, and asked them to let it go as a favor to him. They looked at the rank on his card and went. Then the hall crowded him because Jeremy had been reported dead in a dungeon a month ago, and the guild walked him into a back office. They kept him until nearly morning. At breakfast, he had shadows under his eyes, and the rest of the story. He had given the guild maps of the first 19 floors of a certain dungeon, drawn by himself. Hannah buttered her bread and said that sounded thorough. With a veteran attending, he explained, even an F rank could take work up to C. She was still reading the easy column when Victor pulled a card off the wall without reading it. 4 stars, C rank, the hardest thing on that wall. The clerk at the counter nearly wept. She had been about to raise it to B rank for want of takers. A Medusa had settled in a swamp above a village. The village wanted it gone. On the road down, Jeremy asked how a man fights a thing he is not allowed to look at, and Victor offered to blow up the swamp. Hannah said the swamp had done nothing to anybody and asked to take this one. There were statues at the cave mouth, men mostly, in the postures of men who turned around too fast. She took out the terminal and built a golem out of the rock face, 3 times her height, stone the whole way through, because a thing already made of stone cannot be turned into stone. Then a flying camera, the size of a fist, and a hand monitor. Jeremy watched it lift off her palm into the dark and asked what kind of world she came from. On the monitor, the golem walked into a chamber, and the owner of the chamber looked at it with everything she had, which was nothing. 2 sisters came out of the water behind her. It was over in 4 minutes. They sealed the proof the guild required into a cloth bag and went back to the road. Jeremy rode the whole way with both hands over his face. She set the sealed bag on the counter and said the Medusa contract was finished. 3 of them. The clerk looked at the bag, then at the guild card, and at the date on it. Hannah Forrest, registered 2 days ago, F rank. She asked how exactly. Hannah started to answer. Jeremy stepped up to say he had gone along, and the clerk's face cleared and she laughed, loudly. The way you laugh when a joke finally makes sense. Of course, she said. Jeremy did it. 2 or 3 people at the tavern tables laughed with her. Hannah said nothing. She had stood in this room before, in a building with a photocopier, and arguing never made it shorter. Jeremy stopped smiling. No, he put one hand flat on the counter and did not lower his voice at all. This was hers. I carried the bag. She registered 2 days ago and she cleared a 4-star contract you were about to raise to B rank, he said. I was there. I did nothing. She is my benefactor and I am alive because of her, and I will not stand in a public hall and be thanked for her work. Withdraw it. Nobody at the tavern tables was laughing now. The quiet went on past the point of comfort. Somebody set a cup down very carefully. The clerk's ears went red and she said she was sorry, twice, and that she had not meant it that way. A door opened behind the counter and the woman who came through it was already apologizing for her staff, by name, in front of the room. Tall, dark-skinned, red hair in a high ponytail. Kelly, vice master of the Crossford Guild, who told Hannah to come to her directly if it happened again. Then she looked Hannah over and said that people who stand out get picked on, and that she had her eye on this one. By the tavern door, a knot of women who had been staring at Hannah all evening found somewhere else to be. The reward was more than she expected. The next job she took alone. Goblins, F rank. The cheapest work on the wall, because she wanted to do one small thing without a chaperone. Victor came anyway, and Garm and a shared carriage put 6 adventurers down at the tree line. What came out of the trees was not goblins, orcs, more than she could count in one look, and behind them, something a head taller that the rest kept formation around. Victor named it an orc general without much interest. 2 adventurers off her carriage ran. The man got 10 paces, turned back, and shouted at the woman behind him that this was her own doing. She had scattered monster luring incense along the tree line for the new girl, and that he was not dying for it. Then he was gone. The woman had gone down over a root. Something in her leg had given, and she stayed in the grass shouting at his back. Hannah took the terminal out of her sleeve. 3 wyverns came into existence above the clearing, one after another, with a noise like bedsheets snapping. Garm, the big one is yours. The wolf went from knee height to taller than the carriage between one stride and the next, and the field emptied. It took under a minute. Hannah kept her back to most of it. The wyverns came down in a row behind her and waited to be told something else. They're mine, Hannah said. They will not touch you. She put a hand down. After a while, the woman took it and Hannah got her up onto the good leg. The man who ran had at least run to the guild. Horses came up the road hard, 20 armed men and a carriage. Kelly at the head of it in light armor, arriving to deal with a massacre. Hannah waved both arms over her head and shouted that the wyverns were her familiars, and please would nobody shoot them. Kelly swung down, looked at the field, then at 3 wyverns sitting like enormous dogs, then at the small woman in the hooded robe apologizing to her, and asked what request she had taken. Goblin extermination. Kelly laughed, kept laughing, put a hand on her saddle, gave up, and sat down in the grass. She had been an adventurer a long time, she said, when she could talk, and had never heard of a tamer who tames wyverns. Hannah asked whether she could send them home to their nest in the demon forest, which was true in the way that everything she said was true. Kelly waved it through, called for carts for the orc materials, and had the woman with the ruined leg put into her own carriage. She watched Hannah the whole time. They paid her for the orcs as well, a ridiculous amount of money. Hannah came down the guild steps deciding how to spend it, somewhere with tablecloths and something with a bone in it for Garm. She was in an extremely good mood. Behind her, from the dark of a doorway across the street, somebody watched her walk away and hated her. They took her up the stairs instead of to the counter, and the room at the top had sofas in it. Kelly kicked the door shut behind them and dropped into the chair by the window. The man already standing there did not sit down. He was the guildmaster, brown-skinned and built like a door, and he looked at Hannah long enough to be rude about it. "This is the one with the wyverns," Silas said. "3 of them." Kelly put her boots up on the table. "I watched them sit down when she told them to." "You watched a wyvern sit, like a dog waiting for a sausage." Silas rubbed his face with one hand. Kelly told him, cheerfully, that she was using executive privilege and putting the girl at B rank this morning. That got him off the mantelpiece. There was no precedent for it in Crossford, he said. Not once in 40 years. "Then Crossford gets one." Kelly was still grinning. "Put my name on the paper. The responsibility is mine." Hannah found that the rank meant nothing to her, and that the jobs behind it might mean quite a lot. Victor had been bored since the day they arrived, and a bored victor was a victor who offered to blow up swamps. Garm needed something to chase that was bigger than a goblin. She glanced over at Jeremy, who was B rank himself and had been for years, and who she was about to draw level with after 9 days. He smiled at her before she got the question out. "What do you think?" she asked Victor. Victor had his eyes shut, head back against the sofa. He opened one of them slightly, and Silas's cup stopped moving halfway to his mouth. "Do as you like." He closed it again. Silas did not raise the precedent a second time. At Hannah's feet, Garm yawned so widely that he fell over sideways. "Then I'll take it," Hannah said. Kelly's teeth showed. B rank meant the guild could hand her work directly instead of pinning it to a board. "Designated requests," she explained. "Rare and refusable, mostly." Then she leaned forward and put a brooch into Hannah's hand. Silver, with a flat white stone set in it. When the guild needed her, anywhere in the world, the stone would go red. Hannah turned it over twice. She had spent 4 years of her old life attached to a small object that lit up whenever other people wanted something from her, and she had crossed into a world with dragons in it and been handed another one. "Understood," she said, and pinned it inside her robe. She stopped listening after that. The meeting was finished, and she was working out what to take home. Something for Remus, something for the elves, melons for dinner if the market still had the small yellow ones. The door came open again without a knock. A young man from the front desk was in it, no jacket, out of breath. Silas started to tell him they were in a meeting. He spoke over the top of him anyway. The Rodney Kingdom had summoned a saint from another world. Hannah heard the first half of that and then had to wait for the second half to arrive because something had happened to the room. The noise of the hall downstairs went a long way off, as though a door had shut on it. Her hands kept working without her. The brooch pin went through the cloth and into her thumb, and she pushed it home anyway. Under her ribs, everything turned cold at once, with an actual temperature to it, the way cold water has a temperature. Garm's head came up off his paws. Victor opened one eye, and this time he did not close it. Kelly asked her something. Hannah did not hear it. Kelly had to ask it again. It was not envy. She was thinking about a hall with a circle burned into the floor, and an old man reading a screen out loud, and a young man on a step who had decided what she was worth before the reading finished. Somewhere south of here, a woman was standing on that circle right now in her own clothes, holding her own bag, listening to somebody read a number off a screen. Hannah knew exactly what that room did when the number came out wrong. She had been walked out to the edge of a forest for it. She got the pin out of her thumb. When? 6 days ago, the runner told her. Criers in every square by the 3rd day. The same dispatch had reached the guild by courier from 3 separate directions, which was Kelly's next point, and she made it out loud. Nobody was trying to keep this quiet. They were pushing it. You push news like that when you want a war, and you need everybody cheerful about it. What can she do? The announcement had not said. Announcements never do, Kelly told her, and Hannah kept that. Jeremy had stopped smiling somewhere in the middle of all this. Kelly asked, more gently than she said anything else, whether she was all right. "Somebody is having a very good week," Hannah said, and stood up. They were out of the city inside the hour. She did not buy the melons. 6 days earlier, in the country Hannah never talked about, the bells had been ringing for 2 days without stopping. New banners hung down the front of the palace. There was wine coming out of the fountains, and a man selling flags who had run out of flags. The declaration was read in King Ethelbert's name, though the king had not been seen in public since the winter. Total war, every man the kingdom had, against the demon lord's army. Then Elliot Rodney came out onto the balcony above the steps and told the forecourt that heaven had answered them and brought the saint out beside him. Nobody in that square asked what the working had cost. The crown had not published it, and the crowd did not want it. Douglas Harrow stood on the steps below with his helmet under his arm, watching the crowd instead of the woman. The knight beside him was crying and not wiping his face. Douglas asked him what was wrong. The man laughed, said he had no idea, and went on crying. A bread seller had set her tray down on the cobbles and walked away from it. The captain of the north gate had come off his post to get closer, and nobody wrote it in the book. Every face on those steps was pointed the same way. Douglas counted them, and his was the only one that turned. The saint's name was Serena. Her skill was charm. It did not persuade anybody of anything. It took away the part of a person that could disagree with her, and it worked on everyone who could be given a status ailment, which was every man and woman in the Rodney kingdom except one. The last time the temple had run the working, it produced a woman with a skill nobody could use, and the crown had not announced her at all. It had walked her out to the edge of the demon forest and left her standing in the rain. Douglas had walked her. The folded cloth was still inside his left glove. 3 weeks later, they called him to the throne room. There was a chair beside the throne now that had not been there before, and the saint was sitting in it. In the month since she arrived, the war ministry had quietly moved its meetings to the room next to hers. Nobody had signed an order for that. The prince gave Douglas the work himself. There was a dungeon deep in the demon forest with a witch living in it, and the crown wanted her subjugated. Me, Douglas said. Elliot told him that with his experience, a witch ought to be nothing at all, and asked him, with no warmth in it, whether he was dissatisfied. Then the saint spoke, and she was kind about him. She told the room she had heard the knight commander was a hero of long standing, and what a comfort it was to have such a man in the kingdom. The room agreed with her. It agreed loudly and instantly, and 2 of the ministers agreed twice. How many men do I take? His own company, 60 of them. The list, he was told, had already been drawn up. He asked who had drawn it up. The prince looked at the saint. The saint looked pleasantly back at him. Nobody answered the question, and somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Douglas bowed. He bowed deeper than the order needed, and he held it there, with his face down where nobody in that room could see it, until Elliot told him to get up. Then he went out, and his boots were the only sound in the place. The saint came out a little while after him, and her eyes were wet. The knights waiting in the hall saw it at once. One of them asked her what had happened. She said it was nothing. She said it a second time, in the way that makes people ask a third. Then she told them, since they insisted, that the knight commander had spoken to her, and that she was quite sure he had not meant it the way it sounded, and would they please not make anything of it. They made something of it. By the time Douglas reached the courtyard, the 60 men who would ride into the demon forest with him had been given a second set of instructions. Nobody gave them to him. 4 weeks after the bells, he rode out through the north gate with his own men behind him. He checked the girth strap the way he had checked it every morning for 20 years. He pulled his left glove tight at the wrist. He did not look back at the palace, and not one of the 60 looked at another. Back in Crossford, 3 weeks before he rode out, Hannah went home the evening she heard. They went in with a crowd of other adventurers and walked down 3 floors like everybody else. After that, nobody was watching, so she took them the rest of the way in 1 step. Remus came across the living room at a speed she had not known he could do. His face, which had been built by somebody who wanted a dignified man in it, was ruined. Wet all the way down, mouth going. "Master, you are safe. You are really safe. I was gone 9 days, Hannah said. She pulled a tissue out of the box on the table and wiped his nose for him. He put the used one in his pocket afterwards, which he did every time, for reasons she had stopped asking about. Victor was on the sofa inside a minute with his feet up on the arm, remarking to nobody that it had been a long while since he ate anything she cooked, and Jeremy was standing in the middle of the carpet, not moving. Hannah stopped. She had meant to leave him on floor 90. She had thought about it, in fact, roughly 1 second after arriving. Remus turned and looked at her without saying anything, which was worse. "We could always get rid of him," Victor said from the sofa, without opening his eyes. Jeremy went very still. Hannah told Victor to go and find something to eat. Then Jeremy asked what the humming was. It was the refrigerator. She opened it to show him, and the light came on inside. And that was the thing that got him. A cold box with a lamp in it that switched itself off when the door shut. "Where does any of this come from?" She closed the door. "The world I was born in." He looked around at all of it again, slowly. "That explains it," he said. "Why he stays. I could never work out what he was doing here. It was not unkind." Hannah said nothing at all and put the sentence somewhere to look at later and did not look at it later. Then Remus cleared his throat and said there was, unfortunately, a problem with the master's room. She was down the corridor before he finished the sentence. pulling the robe off over her head as she went because her room had her books in it. She got the door open and shouted. The room was gone. Vines up every wall and across the ceiling, leaves lying over the desk in a mat 2 hands deep, tendrils through the shelf and around the spines of her books, something green growing out of the light fitting. The bed was a mound with a shape under it. In the middle of the mound, in its pot, sat the everbloom, pale pink, entirely unbothered, firing seeds out across the room at about 1 a second, which it had apparently been doing for weeks. It stopped when it saw her. Then it got into her head all at once, the way it always did, and it was not happy. You left, you went away, and you did not come back, and I was here. It wanted to know why she never stayed, and whether she liked the wolf better, and whether she had any idea how long a week was. It had counted them. It told her the number twice. I'm sorry, Hannah said. I'm sorry. She had asked Remus to water it every day, she told it. From the doorway, Remus said that he had twice a day, and that it had made no difference whatsoever. It didn't want water. She cleared a corner of the bed to sit on and put one finger against a leaf, and the flower pushed the whole leaf into her hand and held it there. That was when Jeremy arrived in the doorway and made a sound. He had both hands on the frame. That is an everbloom. Hannah told him it was a present. Hannah, there are more seeds in this room than the Rodney Kingdom raises in taxes in a year. This one room is worth more than the national budget of a kingdom. The old elf chief had told her the same thing the night Victor put it in her hand, down on one knee by the fire, with the whole camp standing up around him. One of those would take any sickness out of any body, he said, and his people had not seen the plant growing in 3 generations. Hannah looked around. There were thousands of them. They were in her shoes. She said the elves should have most of them. She owed them more than she could put a number on. They could not be paid in money. And there were more seeds in this room than she had cupboards to put them in. Jeremy made another sound. Remus asked how many boxes he should bring. She was already looking for something to sweep with. As many as you have. Out in the corridor, Jeremy sat down against the wall with his eyes shut. I didn't see anything, he said. I didn't see anything. Nobody argued with him. Jeremy had been sitting in front of his bowl for some time without putting anything in his mouth. There were 4 of them on the table. Cold rice, slices of raw fish laid over the top, a raw egg cracked into the middle of each one. Victor had finished his before anybody else started. Remus ate standing up, the way he always did, and had already put his bowl in the sink. It's fish, Hannah said. It's only fish. Jeremy moved his chopsticks toward the egg and did not arrive. In this world, an egg went in a pan, or it went in the bin, and he had been told that his whole life. She told him hers came from the same place the refrigerator came from, and that nobody had ever been ill off one at her table. Victor did not look up from his tea. Think of it as that kind of food. Eat it. It's good. That settled it. Jeremy broke the yolk, turned it through the rice, and took the first mouthful like a man doing something brave in front of witnesses. Then he took a second. Then he stopped talking altogether and worked down through the bowl without one word, which from Jeremy was a review. Remus set the kettle down and said he would look in on the management room for a moment. Nobody thought anything of it. Hannah poured the tea. Garm put his chin over her foot under the table. Jeremy scraped the last of the rice out of the corner of the bowl with the side of his chopsticks and asked, very carefully, whether there was any more fish. Remus came back before she could answer. Master, the elves have picked something up. Their scouts had found a man in the trees a short walk from the entrance, badly hurt and long past walking. Not by anything living in the forest. The elves were fairly sure it had been done by soldiers of the Rodney Kingdom. Jeremy came half out of his chair. The legs went back across the floor with a noise. Then he stopped himself, sat down again, and put both hands flat on the table on either side of the bowl. Hannah looked at the tea instead of at him. Can we treat him out there? She asked, without bringing him any further in. They have already carried him to the first floor, Remus said. Victor put his cup down. Then we abandoned him. There was no heat in it. It was not cruelty. It was arithmetic, and she could not make herself nod at it. Under the table, Garm lifted his head off her foot. She got up and went to the management room. The wall came alive when she walked in, and she found the first floor without having to look for it. The entrance chamber was gray with forest light. Andrew was down on both knees on the wet stone with a man propped up against his chest, holding him under the arms. And Andrew was not a large elf, and the man was very large, 40s somewhere, brown hair going gray, cut close to the head, short beard, an old scar down one cheekbone that had healed crooked a long time ago. Dark blue-gray cloth under the plate. He was dying, and his left arm was gone. Victor had followed her in and stopped in the doorway. He said the man would be finished long before anyone reached him, and then he stopped, because Jeremy had come in behind him, and Jeremy had gone completely still. "Douglas," Jeremy said. Hannah did not move. Douglas Harrow, Knight Commander of the Rodney Kingdom. The man who had walked her east out of the capital, told her to go into the trees, drawn his sword, and then cut a lock of her hair off instead, so the file would close behind her. She had said 2 sentences to him at the edge of that forest, and she still had both of them. She had not looked at that face in over a year, and she knew it in under a second, which was its own small, unwelcome piece of information. Behind her, Jeremy was already going for the door. He got as far as the portal in the corridor and then stood in front of it, hitting the frame with the flat of his hand, because nobody had ever shown him how it worked, and it did not care how urgent he was. Hannah caught his sleeve. "Hold still." Then they were on the first floor, in the cold, with the forest breathing in through the mouth of the cave. Andrew's head came up fast, and whatever he had braced himself to argue about went out of him all at once. He did not let go. He had been holding the man up for a long time by then, and his arms were shaking with it. Jeremy went down on his knees on the stone hard enough that she heard it. "Douglas, Douglas, look at me." He had both hands on him, and he was shaking him, and the head came round slowly, and the eyes took a long time to find anything. "Is that Jeremy? Don't move. Just don't move." "I am glad," Douglas said. "I have seen you once more. That is enough for me. It is nowhere near enough." Douglas kept going anyway, in complete sentences, one at a time, with a gap in the middle of every one of them. Since Jeremy left the country, there had been nothing holding it. He should go back. There was nobody else left who could be trusted. Nobody at all, and somebody had to be. "Go back to the castle," he said. "The castle? No, the whole country. It belongs to the saint." Jeremy's hands tightened on him. "What does that mean?" "Douglas, what does that mean?" "Don't shake him!" Andrew's voice came off the walls of the chamber. "He's going." Then it was quiet in there. Hannah stood 2 steps back with her hands in her sleeves and looked at the man who had walked her into this forest, dying on the floor of it. She thought about it for as long as it took to think about it. "Move," she said, and put her hand on Jeremy's shoulder and pushed him out of the way, and he went over sideways onto the stone and stayed there. There were 2 everbloom seeds in her right pocket. There were 4 more in the coat hanging in the corridor at home, and several boxes of them stacked against the wall of a bedroom she currently could not walk into. She got one out between 2 fingers. It was the size of a grain of rice. It had been in that pocket for days because she kept meaning to put them away and kept not doing it. Andrew said her name once, like a question. She did not answer him. She got her hand under the jaw, pushed the chin down with her thumb, put the seed on his tongue, closed his mouth, and held it closed. Nothing happened. She counted. Nothing kept happening. Andrew's arms were shaking harder now. Somebody's breath was going in and out fast, and she was fairly sure it was Jeremy's. The elf chief had told her one seed would take any sickness out of any body, and the elf chief had also told her that nobody in his village had seen the plant growing in 3 generations, which meant that nobody in his village had ever actually watched one work. She kept her hand where it was. Then the light came. It came up out of the man on the floor, white and completely silent, and it went through everything in the chamber, the stone, the elf, the 2 humans, the roof, and there was a moment in the middle of it where Hannah could not see her own hands. Then it was gone, and it was a cold rock room again. Douglas was breathing, not the way he had been breathing a minute ago. There was color in his face, and his eyes were open and tracking, and he was lying flat on the stone with 2 arms. He lifted the left one. He held it up in front of his face and turned it over and looked at the back of his own hand for a long time without saying anything to anybody. Jeremy made a sound she had never heard out of him before, got hold of him, and did not let go. Andrew sat down flat on the wet floor with his hands on his knees. Hannah stayed where she was and let them have it. Then the man on the stone stopped looking at his hand and looked past Jeremy's shoulder at her, and his face changed, and she understood, a little late and at some expense, that she had just informed the Knight Commander of the Rodney Kingdom that the woman he had filed as dead was alive, healthy, and standing in a dungeon. "Well," she said, to nobody in particular, "that's that then." He went under again on the way down and came round on her sofa about an hour later, and the first thing he did was look at the ceiling. There was a great deal to look at. Flat white light with no flame anywhere in it. A wall of cupboards with handles. A machine in the corner that hummed, stopped humming, and started again. Carpet. He sat up the way a man sits up when he has decided the room is a hallucination and does not want to be rude about it. Victor was against the counter with his arms folded. "Why do you keep bringing things home?" Hannah let that go past and put a cup of tea into Douglas's hands. He took it in both of them. She sat down in the chair opposite with Garm's head across her foot and told him. She was the master of this dungeon. She had not taken it off anybody. The thing that owned it had been a puppy at the time. She had made friends with it, and it had handed her the whole place. The floor they were sitting on she had built herself, out of a home she used to have, and it ran on her own magic. Her magic was triple S. That was the row at the bottom of the screen in the Great Hall, under the skills line, the one the old mage never got down to. Douglas put the cup on the low table and did not drink any of it. He looked at the ceiling light, then at the humming machine, then at the carpet, and he could not hold on to any of it for longer than a second, and he could not look at her at all. If they had used you, he said, instead of throwing you away, none of this would have happened. Nobody in the room said anything. Then he told them the rest, with his hands flat on his knees, in the same level voice he had used at the edge of the forest to tell her there was nothing more they could do for her. The kingdom had summoned a second time, and it had worked. They had got a saint. Her name was Serena. Her skill was called charm, and it did not talk anyone round to anything. It took out the part of a person that could disagree with her, and it worked on every man and woman in the capital who could be given a status ailment. How many can't? Hannah asked. He gave his own name. Nothing stuck to him. It never had. He had stood on the palace steps and watched a whole square of people turn their faces the same way at the same time, and a knight beside him cry without knowing why, and he had been the only one in the building pointed the wrong direction. A month later, he was handed an order, and 60 men chosen for him off a list somebody else had already drawn up, and sent into the demon forest to kill a witch who was living in a dungeon. He stopped there. Hannah did the arithmetic out loud, because somebody was going to have to. That's this dungeon, yes. And the witch is me, yes. Jeremy asked what had happened to the 60 men. Douglas said the 60 men had been given a second set of instructions, and that nobody had given them to him. That was all he said about it, and Hannah did not ask him for any more of it, and neither did anyone else in the room. I helped the two of you because you were in front of me, she said. That's all it was. I'm not getting involved with that country. I don't want anything out of it, and I'm not going near it. Stay here and rest for a bit. There's food. Jeremy said yes before she had finished the sentence. Douglas said nothing at all and looked at his left hand again. Remus came in with a tray, set it down, and did not leave. Victor pushed off the counter, crossed the room, and stopped in front of the sofa. You're the one who left her in this forest. Douglas stood up. You meant her to die out here. Am I wrong? You're not wrong, Hannah said, before Douglas could get there first. He did that. He was told to do it. Victor turned around. By whom? By the crown prince of the Rodney kingdom. It wasn't his idea, and it wasn't his choice. He was given an order. A man who obeys a stupid order, Victor said, is stupid enough to be blamed for it. Nobody in that room had an answer to it, including her. It was correct, and everyone standing there knew it was correct. Douglas said he would not make excuses. He said he had very nearly been the death of her, that he had no right to be under this roof, and that he would go in the morning rather than be one more thing she had to deal with. Victor made a short sound through his nose. Good, master. Remus had not spoken since he put the tray down. I oppose that. Everyone looked at him. The man knew what she was, Remus said. He had seen floor 99. He had seen the master of the dungeon, and he could carry all of it out through the forest in his head. There were two ways to close that, and Remus set them out in the order they occurred to him. The man does not leave, or the man does not live. He said it without any relish whatsoever. He said it in the voice he used for the water pressure. The worst of it was that he was right, and Hannah could feel precisely how right he was, sitting in her own chair with her tea going cold in her hands. No, she said. She did not stand up for it. She ruled from where she was. Douglas would stay a few days. Then he could decide whether he wanted to be here, and if he did not want to be here, there was an entire elf settlement 10 floors up that would take him in an afternoon. Nobody was going to hold him, and nobody was going to do anything else to him either, because she was not going to carry somebody's death around for the rest of her life in order to save herself an inconvenience. And where she came from, that sentence did not need explaining to anybody. And while he's under this roof, nobody in this house is hostile to anybody, she said. I don't like the atmosphere. Understood? Victor and Remus looked at her with the same expression arranged on two completely different faces. Neither of them said another word about it. She and Remus put an extension on the living room that afternoon, 2 rooms and a short corridor, finished before dinner, because the alternative was 2 grown men standing politely in the middle of her floor forever. Victor did not help with it. Victor went to his room, so she made chocolate, mild milk for herself, and a second batch with champagne in it for him, because he had opinions about sweetness. She stopped in his doorway and held the box out without coming all the way in. "There's chocolate." He took 4 pieces. He ate them one after another without stopping and without thanking her, which meant they were a success. "Are you fonder of your own kind?" he asked. She said no, and that she had not been any softer on those two than she had been on the elves. "You did not put the elves in your kitchen." Then he got to the part he had gone to his room about. That one was a knight, trained and twice her weight. If he ever decided to walk her out of this room, he would walk her out of this room, and Victor would find out about it afterward. She pointed out that she had a dragon, a golem, and a wolf. Victor pointed out that the wolf sleeps, the dragon goes out, and the golem does not belong to her at all. Remus belonged to the dungeon. If the dungeon ever had a different master, Remus would go back to being a shape with no edges and come out of it as somebody else entirely, and he would serve that person exactly as well as he served her. She had not known that. She put her cup down and sat with it and did not like it at all. "Make guards," Victor said. "Monsters. You have never made one. Not one in all this time. I'll think about it." "You will not." He was right about that too. They went round it twice more. She said that if Douglas had wanted her dead, she would have been dead a year ago at the edge of that forest, and that a man who could not manage it then was not going to manage it in her kitchen. Victor said that was exactly what he meant by soft. Then he reached over and took the last piece out of her hand, the milk one, hers, and ate it. "If you're keeping those two close," he said, "then I am staying close. What's different from before?" He thought about it properly, which took a moment. Nothing. He was in a considerably better mood after that. The elves sent word down, asking her to come up to floor 90, and did not say why, which was how Hannah ended up standing in their village at 10 in the morning holding a box of lemon cake. The old chief came across the grass at a speed she did not think was good for a man his age, and he and Andrew both bowed before she got the lid off. "It's cake," she said. "Lemon. It's not exciting." A small old man was sitting on the corner of the box. He had not been there a moment earlier. About the length of her forearm, white-bearded, glowing softly at the edges, and he told her without introducing himself that he would have a piece. Hannah did not put the box down. "Right." The chief followed her eyes, saw grass, and looked back at her politely. She described what she was seeing, and Andrew's face changed. "That will be an earth gnome, a spirit. We cannot see them." The gnome climbed onto her wrist and announced that he was the guardian of the earth. Then he took the slice she cut him, bigger than his head, and started at the corner with both arms around it. He was on the second slice before he mentioned anything. He lived in the dwarf village, he said, up in the mountains at the far edge of the forest, which the chief knew and Hannah did not. Humans had come into the valley, a great many of them, and the fighting had gone on for days. Then he asked with his mouth full whether the dwarves could come and live in her hole in the ground the way the elves had. Hannah looked at him. He was still eating the cake. She had wanted to take 3 of them, her, Garm, Victor, done by dinner. Douglas and Jeremy heard the words dwarf village and human army in the same sentence and were on their feet before she finished. Hannah pointed out that the whole kingdom's army knew Douglas's face. Douglas said that was the reason he was going, did not elaborate, and she gave up. Victor did not argue. He walked 100 yards out in front of the party for 2 solid days and never once looked back at the 2 of them, which was as close to an apology as anyone was going to get. They went on foot, which was not the fast way. Victor could have been standing in that valley before the cake was finished. "If you go up there alone," she told him, "there won't be anybody left to shelter, including the dwarves. Walk." Garm went to full size at the entrance and carried her, the luggage, and food for 5 people and a wolf that she had overpacked by roughly 9 times. Every hour or so, Victor stopped, waited for Garm to draw level, and told him not to leave her side. Garm barked back like a creature who had heard it the first 11 times. Behind them, 2 grown men who fought for a living struggled to keep up with a walking pace. The dwarf village was a cave mouth in a cliff, and there was an army sitting in front of it. Not a raiding party. Tent rows, cook fires, picket lines, a supply track worn into the grass. Hundreds of men. Douglas started to say he would go down. Jeremy put a hand out without turning round. "Every man in that camp has stood in a yard while you inspected it," Jeremy said. "Nobody down there has ever looked twice at me." He came back 20 minutes later, frowning. The dwarves had built a barricade inside the narrow entrance, so the numbers outside were worth nothing. There had been fighting at the mouth on and off for days, and the army was not pushing it. It was waiting, and had started discussing harder ways of getting them out, and had not used any of them, because the order from the crown was to take the dwarves rather than finish them. They were wanted for the mines. Douglas did not look away from the tents. "Who has command?" Jeremy told him it was Eddie Larkins. Douglas bit down on nothing. Eddie had been his adjutant for 6 years and learned every recruit's name inside a week. Since the saint arrived, he said, the whole country had lost its mind and nobody inside it could tell. Hannah kept to herself that the country had been managing that fairly well before Serena turned up. "The ones down there," she said instead. "Can they still be scared?" Douglas turned round. "Their judgment is wrong," he said slowly. "What they want is wrong, but the body still works. Pain is still pain. They can be frightened." That was all she needed. Hannah looked at Victor, and Victor was already looking back. "Then may I go?" He had never once asked her that. Not on the mountain, not at the guild, not in her own kitchen. 3 things. Make them run. Don't touch the village or anybody in it. And if they won't run, scatter them without killing anybody. Victor tipped his head. Understood. Douglas came up onto one knee. "Not alone. Even for him. That many men, he'll be fine," Hannah said. "It's them I'm worried about." Victor stepped out of the scrub and started down the slope on his own, wearing a black coat and no armor at all. The sentries saw him at 200 paces and shouted for a name and an affiliation. He kept walking. They shouted it again. A man in a sergeant's sash came out between the tents, saw a tall stranger in ordinary clothes strolling into a siege line, and put his hand up. More came. Spears came down level. Inside half a minute, there were 30 of them round him in a ring, cook fires going out along the row behind, and men climbing onto a supply cart to see. The sergeant told him to get on the ground. Victor yawned. One of them moved. The wind came first. It came up the slope ahead of everything else, hot and full of grit, and she watched the line of it flatten the scrub. Her hood went back off her head. The pack beside her knee went over and emptied itself downhill. A tree she had been leaning against bent over and stayed bent. Garm turned round and put himself in front of her, and Hannah got a face full of white fur and an excellent view of nothing at all. She could not hear. That was the part she had not expected. No roar, no thunder, nothing with an edge on it. Only a pressure that took the sound out of the world and left her ears with no work to do. Then the light went. She got her head out from under Garm's shoulder and looked up, and the sky over the camp was not there anymore. Black, wet-looking black, laid in plates, each plate bigger than a door, a head longer than a house, coming round slowly on a neck that kept on arriving, wings opening, still opening after she had already decided they must be finished, until the shadow went out over the tent rows, and then over the cliff, and then over the ridge, and over her, and the afternoon turned into the minute before rain. The ground came up through her knees when he sat down. Then the sound arrived, and it was not a sound. It was a pressure in her back teeth and in the bone behind her ears, and every horse in that valley screamed at once. "Death Black Dragon, King of Dragons, Guardian of the Land of Death." The words arrived in her head in the flat voice of something she had read once. Below her, the camp came apart. The horses went first, whole picket lines of them, tearing the pegs out and going through the tents rather than around them. The men went second. Spears hit the dirt in rows, dropped where they stood. A siege line that had held that cliff for days emptied toward the tree line in under a minute. Men going over each other, a few still shouting orders nobody was taking. Douglas was down in a crouch with both palms flat on the dirt. Jeremy had not moved at all. "What is he?" Jeremy said. His voice did not work properly. "Victor's other name is the Death Black Dragon." Neither of them answered. And then, out in the middle of the emptying field, one man turned round. He came back through his own army the wrong way, shoving past men who were running, and when he had clear ground, he drew his sword, put his head down, and ran straight at it. Douglas came half up out of the crouch. He knew exactly who that was. Douglas was shouting the man's name, and it went nowhere. Jeremy got both arms round him from behind and held on, because a former knight commander of the Rodney Kingdom yelling across a Rodney camp was the one thing that could still go wrong. The dragon lifted a foot the size of a wagon and brought it down. Hannah's stomach went with it. The foot stopped a body's length short, and the man underneath it went off his feet and up, caught and held on nothing at all, turning over slowly in the air like a coat somebody had thrown. He came down on his back in the grass and did not get up. Then Victor cleared the field. He swept the ground behind the runners with his tail, took one long breath, and let it out over the top of them, and every tent still standing went flat at once. Nobody was left in that valley 30 seconds later. Hannah was still watching the empty field. He asked first. He actually asked. The barricade was still standing and nobody was holding it. She found them inside, 40 or 50 in the first hall, flat out on the stone where they had been standing. Short, broad, bearded, armored in their own work, and every one of them unconscious with fright. They came round slowly, then would not speak, then would not come out from behind the ore carts. So she put a hand flat on the rock and asked the ground for help, and the gnome came up through the floor with crumbs still in his beard. That worked. It took an hour, and it was not her doing. She told them what she had. A mountain range inside the dungeon, high and cold and full of stone, elves 10 floors above it, and nothing outside that could reach any of them. room for everybody, and they could keep their forges. The dwarf doing the talking listened to all of it, sat down on an upturned crate, and asked what payment she required. None, Hannah said. He asked again, in case she had misunderstood him. She had not. He asked a third time in terms of ore tonnage and years, and Hannah looked at Garm, who was no help. She shook her head. Nothing. There isn't a payment. You just come. They were still arguing about it among themselves when they started packing. Victor came back on 2 legs with the knight over one shoulder and put him down in the grass like a rolled carpet. Douglas was on his knees beside him before the man had settled. Red hair, young, a face he clearly knew every line of. He said the name once and then said Eddie would never have agreed to this. Not a village. Then we leave him, Victor said. No, he brought an army to a cliff. He was brought to a cliff, Douglas said. There's a difference, and you know it. Hannah made them stop arguing about that and start on the actual problem, which was where a charmed Rodney officer was supposed to go. Not the sanctuary, Victor said, and for once he explained himself. The world tree was in there, and the spirits were in there, and if that reached the capital would come for all of it. Not the new dwarf village either, since he had been standing outside it that morning with hundreds of men. Victor's actual position was that the man should not go into the dungeon at all, and everyone knew it, so they put him up on Garm and roped him on, and went on arguing over the top of him. The rope was still in her hand when he opened his eyes. He looked at the sky, then at the enormous wolf he was tied to, with no reaction at all, which told her how far behind he was. Then he found Douglas. Commander, his voice came out thick. Why are you? He never finished it. Something went through him, and she watched it happen, the way a shiver runs down a horse, and his face changed shape, and he came up off Garm's back against the ropes hard enough to move a wolf the size of a cart sideways. He was shouting to be let go. The words had stopped being words. He got one arm free to the elbow and started on the rest, and whatever was doing that for him, it was not his own strength. Douglas went straight for him. Jeremy went after Douglas. Victor was suddenly there without appearing to have crossed the ground in between. Hey, calm down, please. He stopped, not slowly. All of it went out of him at once. Arms, shoulders, jaw, everything, and he sagged back onto the wolf with his mouth open. Garm's ears came up. Nobody else moved at all. Eddie blinked at the sky, then at Douglas, who was standing over him with both hands out and nothing left to do with them. How did I get here? He said. Commander, what is happening? Hannah stood in the middle of a field holding the end of a rope that was no longer attached to anything. It had been 4 words. She untied him herself the next afternoon and apologized for the ropes, which he did not seem to think she owed him. They had stopped in the shade to let the dwarf column close up. Eddie sat against the tree with his wrists in his lap and asked what he had done, and Douglas told him. He had been the supreme commander of it. The village had been completely surrounded, long enough for the dwarves to build a barricade and hold it. Eddie asked how it ended. Douglas looked at the ground, because Eddie was still, on paper, an officer of the Rodney kingdom. So Jeremy answered. He had gone at a black dragon on foot, alone, with a sword. For a while, Eddie said nothing. He turned his hands over and looked at them. I don't remember 1 hour of it, he said. Not one, and I would never have done that. Not on foot, not at a dragon, not for a mine full of ore. Then he noticed Hannah and told her he was glad she had not been hurt out there, which she had no idea what to do with. She shrugged. I was behind the wolf. It was fine. Victor did not look up from the fruit he was eating. Nothing about yesterday was good. And what your country did to Hannah doesn't come off because the 2 of you feel bad about it now. Both of the Rodney men flinched. Eddie put his head back against the bark. Since the saint came, he said, the palace has been like everybody in it is being shown the same dream. All of us. The same one. You can't tell from inside. He stopped and said the rest of it much smaller. If I go back on my own, they'll just put me back in it. I can't get anybody else out. Nobody answered him. Douglas was looking at Hannah. He had been looking at her since the word dream, and he did not stop, and he did not ask her anything. Jeremy was doing the same from the other side of the tree. It took Eddie a little longer. He worked something through, and then turned his head and looked at her too. 3 men sat under a tree, and looked at a woman who had not spoken for a while. Hannah looked at the ground. None of them had asked her anything. She was not going to be the one who said it first. The old dwarf put his hand flat on the tunnel wall and left it there long enough that Hannah started to worry she had cut the seam wrong. There is iron behind this, he said. There's iron behind most of it. Copper starts about 40 paces that way, and there's a vein of something silver up in the top gallery that I couldn't identify. He moved along the wall with his hand still on it, the way another man checks a horse, and said nothing for 20 paces. She had put the mine 1 floor below the sanctuary. Her first idea had been the land of death, which was already stone and already the size of a country. Her second idea had been the several dozen dragons living in it, so she had built the floor new instead. Tunnels, or a broad flat shelf for the forges, water running along one wall, and a roof high enough that nobody had to stoop. She had chosen the position for the world tree. Its pole reached 2 floors down, and that morning, the earth gnome had come out of the rock at her feet to say the spirits in this stone had woken for the first time in a long while, and then to ask whether there was any cake left. The dwarves could not see him. They could feel the stone, though. Every one of them had stopped inside the first 100 paces and put a hand on it, and none of them explained why. Remus waited at the tunnel mouth with a ledger balanced on one white glove. He turned a page. 241, plus 11 born on the road. The forges will require venting, which I have taken the liberty of solving. The elves are directly above them and have already sent down bread. Do they know that elves and dwarves are supposed to hate each other? I believe neither party has been informed. Hannah looked down the tunnel at a nation unpacking itself into a hole she had dug, and did the arithmetic she had been avoiding all week. It had started with 3 of them. Her, a white puppy, small enough to hold in both hands, and a shapeless thing in a tailcoat that had wanted a name. Now there was a dragon king in her kitchen who would not eat anything without cheese on it. 2 more dragons on the mountain floor who came down for dinner. 400 elves living under a tree that should not exist. Adventurers coming and going through the front door on permits. A knight commander of the Rodney Kingdom that his own country believed to be dead. A man that country had exiled, and, as of this morning, every dwarf alive in the mountains, with their anvils. She had not gone looking for a single one of them. Every group in her dungeon was one the Rodney Kingdom had thrown out, hunted, or sent soldiers after, and all of them had arrived by walking away from the same place. Before she went up, she checked the brooch out of habit. Silver, white stone, pinned inside her collar. Kelly had handed it over with one instruction. If this goes red, drop whatever you are holding. It had been white since the day she pinned it on, which meant Crossford was fine. It was the only thread she had to anything outside her own walls. Eddie Larkins asked where you would be this evening, Remus said. Eddie waited until the plates were cleared before he said it. I'm going back, once the last of them is down and settled. A week, maybe less. Douglas set his cup down without any sound at all. They will have you inside a day. Inside an hour, probably. Eddie turned his hands over and looked at them, which he had been doing on and off since the forest. I felt it come off me. I'll feel it go back on. I know exactly what I'm walking into. Hannah stopped with a stack of plates in her arms. Then what's the point of going? He answered her straight. Because I'm not the only one in it. If I stay here, I'm safe. And so is everybody in this room. And every man I marched to that cliff is still standing exactly where I left him. There are 70,000 people in that city. You cannot get one of them out from a forest. Nobody said anything for a moment. Garm shifted under the table. I want you both to come with me, Eddie said. Jeremy laughed once, with nothing behind it. I was exiled by royal order. If I cross that border, they don't put me back to sleep. They put me in front of a magistrate. And I am dead, Douglas said. My own company reported it. There are men in that capital who would take one look at my face and understand something they have been comfortably not understanding for a year. I know all of that. Then you know what you are asking. Eddie leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to be in the same country as me on the morning I stop being myself. That's the whole request. Douglas looked at the floor. Jeremy looked at the ceiling. Neither of them said no, and neither of them said yes. And the silence ran on, long enough that Hannah carried the plates out to the kitchen. Nobody asked her anything. She noticed how carefully nobody was doing it. The curry had been on for 2 hours the following evening when Douglas came in with his face already arranged. He got 2 steps into the room, opened his mouth, and stopped. His face came apart. What is that? Hannah took a tasting spoon out of the drawer and held it out to him. Try it before you say anything. Whatever you came in here to tell me will keep. He took the spoon the way a man takes an order he does not understand. Then he tasted it and stood absolutely still in the middle of her kitchen with the spoon in his mouth. What is in this? About 20 things, she said, 4 of which do not exist in this world, which is why it took me 9 tries to get it right. Beef, onion cooked down for an hour, rice, and a block of something from home that costs about as much as a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread, he looked at the spoon. Your world is astonishing. My world has that block on a shelf in every shop in the country, next to the soap. He asked her what the magic looked like there, and she told him there wasn't any. No skills, no spirits, no monsters, not one. He asked her twice, in different words, because he thought he had misheard, so she gave him the rest of it. Light with no fire in it. A box that keeps food cold for a week. carriages that move without horses, faster than a dragon. A thing you hold in your hand that lets you talk to somebody on the far side of the world, in real time, for nothing. He turned the tasting spoon over in his fingers. Who does the healing? People who studied for 11 years. It takes months, it hurts, and sometimes it doesn't work. Then what were you all afraid of? Hannah thought about it. Mostly our jobs. He listened to every word of it, the way a man listens when he intends to remember it later. Then he put the spoon down on the counter. I have been trying to find a way to say this since the day I woke up in your house, he said. There isn't one, so I am going to say it badly. She stopped stirring. The wooden spoon stayed in her hand. I walked you out to the demon forest. I chose the place. I told you what was in there, and I told you nobody had ever walked back out of it. And then I drew my sword on you. I cut a lock of your hair off so there would be something to put in a file. And I left you standing at the tree line in the rain. And I turned round and walked back to the road and never once looked behind me. He did not look away while he said it, which was new. I have no excuse. I am not going to offer you one, and I am not asking you to forgive me. I wanted you to hear me say what I did, out loud, once, in the room where you live. You were following an order, Hannah said. Elliot Rodney gave it. If you had refused, he'd have found somebody else to walk me out there inside the hour, and that man wouldn't have carried the hair around for a year. He did give the order. Well then, and I carried it out. Douglas shook his head slowly. Both of those are true. Only one of them is mine, and it is the one I am talking about. Please do not take it off me. I have been carrying it a long time, and I would rather not put it down like that. Hannah did not have anything to say to that. That country is not rotten through, he went on. It is held. Take those two out of it and it comes back. Every man at that cliff has a wife who was normal before the bells rang. Then he straightened up, and something in the way he did it changed the shape of the room. So, I would like to ask you something. I want to ask it properly, because I have no standing to ask it at all. She waited. As Knight Commander of the Rodney Kingdom, which on paper I still am, since nobody has got around to burying me, and as the man who walked you into that forest and left you in it. His voice did not shake, and it did not rise. I am asking you to break the Saints' hold on my country. Hannah stood there and heard herself, months ago, beside the fires on floor 90, telling 400 elves that she wanted nothing to do with the Rodney Kingdom. No revenge, no restitution, nothing. And then, weeks later, in the chief's front room, telling a man who had just knelt on the floorboards the same thing directly to his face. Do you know what I told the elves? She said. I have heard. I told them I wanted nothing from that country and nothing to do with it. And then I said it again to Jeremy. And he is asleep 2 rooms from where you are standing. So I can't even pretend I've forgotten saying it. She turned the wooden spoon over in her hand. I said it twice. I meant it both times. Douglas did not move. Garm put his chin on her foot. Okay, Hannah said. I beg your pardon. Yes, I'll do it. Douglas Harrow sat down on her kitchen floor with his back against the cupboard door. It was the only thing he did that whole evening that he had not planned in advance. He did not thank her. He put both hands over his face and stayed there, and Hannah stood in her own kitchen holding a wooden spoon and let him. She had been working on it since the field, which she admitted to him the next morning over the ingredients for something else. 4 words, several paces, no contact, no ritual, nothing in her hands. A man who had come off a wolf with a strength that was not his own had simply stopped. So the problem isn't power, she said. Whatever that was, it worked the first time I did it by accident. The problem is that he heard me. Douglas set down the bowl he was holding. An old man in a hall read one line off a screen once and never got down to the row under it. And that row said triple S. It has never once been the useful part. The useful part is that Eddie was close enough to hear the words. She pulled a knife out of the block. I can be heard by about 30 people at once if I shout, and only if the wind is helping. Then it cannot be done. It can be done louder. She started on the onion. It's not a magic problem. It's a delivery problem. And delivery I can buy in a shop. I need 2 things, and I need to be above the city when I use them, because sound carries down better than it carries sideways, and because standing in the middle of a Rodney army on the ground sounds like a bad afternoon. Douglas straightened. Above the city. Yes? On what? She told him. He put a hand on the counter and left it there. I don't know that it will work, Hannah said. I'll say that once, and then I'm not going to keep saying it. One man in a field is not a city, but there's no sense giving up on a thing before I've tried it. He watched her weigh out beef, breadcrumbs, an onion, milk, and a small brown jar of nutmeg, and eventually asked what she was doing. "Isn't it obvious? I'm making hamburger steak." Victor was at the table before the plates were. He sat with both hands flat on the wood and his eyes on the kitchen doorway, and when Hannah came through it with the tray, his whole face did something it did for nothing else. "Tonight's curry has a hamburger steak in it," she said, and put it down in front of him. Garm's tail went off like something coming loose in a machine. "Don't put cheese on it yet," Hannah added. "Cut into it first." Victor looked at her, decided this was a reasonable instruction, and cut. The cheese came out of the middle of the meat in a slow flood across the rice. Nobody at that table said anything for a second and a half. "There's cheese in it," Victor said. "There's cheese in it." He looked at the plate. He looked at her. Across the table, Jeremy stopped with a fork halfway to his mouth and did not put it down again for some time. "I have more, if you want it on top as well," Hannah said, and held up the bag. "Yes." She went round and put a handful over the whole plate, and Victor watched her hand the entire way. The most feared creature on the continent, tracking a bag of grated cheese like a man watching a will being read. "Before you get too far into that," she said, "I want to ask you a favor." "What?" "I'd like you to carry me over the Rodney Kingdom. In the air, over the capital." Douglas closed his eyes. Victor ate a mouthful of hamburger steak. "Whether arrows hit or not is no particular problem." "That's good, because I think there will be a great many of them." Hannah sat down at her own place. "I need to be heard by all of them at once. Everybody in that city is asleep on their feet, and I can't wake them one at a time. It has to be the whole city together, or the ones I wake up are just people standing in a crowd being strange." Victor took another mouthful. That was the entire answer. She waited, out of politeness, and then started on her own plate, because there was not going to be any more of it. He had not asked why. He had not asked how long, or how high, or what would be underneath them, or what happened afterward. He had asked about arrows, and then he had asked for extra cheese. Jeremy set his fork down very carefully. "Hannah," he said, "I have been in a room with that in its true shape. I watched an army of hundreds come apart in under a minute because it yawned at them." He looked at the plate and then at her. "I think the thing everyone in this world should be afraid of might be you. It's cooking. It is not cooking." Douglas had not touched his food. "Hannah, is this really all right?" "No." She picked up her spoon. "Don't worry, leave it to me." Victor held his empty plate out sideways without looking up from the table, which was how everybody learned there would be a second serving. The megaphone came out of the terminal on the fourth attempt. Item Create built what she could remember, and the trouble was that nobody remembers a megaphone. A school sports day, a man standing on a box in a field, the flat tinny bark of it coming across the grass. The first came out with no battery. The second was, on inspection, a very heavy gray funnel with a handle. The fourth worked, and she stood in her own kitchen and said the word testing into it, and Garm left the room. Then the speakers. The kind that get bolted to a pole above a platform. Weatherproof, ugly, loud. She built 3 sets, and harness straps to go with them, because one dragon carrying one megaphone was a woman shouting at a country through a paper cup. "You intend to strap those," Remus said, "to dragons. To 3 dragons." "I see." He wrote something down. "Before you go, the block from your world in the curry. Is it available in quantity?" The red dragon agreed before she had finished the sentence, mostly because it was the first thing anybody had asked him to do in 8 weeks. The blue one bowed from the waist and said he would be glad to, and then asked politely whether he might be told what any of it was for, and listened all the way through her explanation without once suggesting it was a bad idea. Neither of them asked what they would get. The last thing she packed was the mask. Plain white, no face on it, the one Remus had put into her hand without a word the day she went up to the 19th floor. It went into the bag with the spare socks and a bottle of water, and nobody said anything about it because it was simply what the witch wore. By the evening, it was all on the kitchen table. A megaphone, 3 sets of speakers and their straps, a white mask, a brooch, and a paper bag of cheese for the flight. That was the plan. That was all of it. In the morning, they were going to fly over a country that had walked her into a forest, cut a lock of her hair off to file her as dead, and gone home. Hannah went to bed at a sensible hour because she had one thing to say and she wanted to say it properly. There were no seatbelts. Hannah had gone into the morning fairly confident about this part. She had flown once on a school trip. She had done the big coaster at the theme park twice in one afternoon and eaten a hot dog afterward. On that evidence, she had decided she would be fine with flying. She was not fine with flying. She was sitting astride the largest living thing on the continent with both hands hooked over the edge of a scale the size of a door, at a height where the demon forest had stopped being trees and gone to green texture, and the wind came past hard enough that she had to turn her head sideways to breathe. Nothing was holding her on. Her body kept going back to that. There was a strap for the bag and a strap for the megaphone and no strap at all for the woman. "You will not fall," Victor said, without turning his head. "The spirits have you." "That is very comforting." "What are they holding me with?" "They are spirits." "Then I will carry on doing it my way, thank you." Behind them, the sky was full. The blue on the left with a set of speakers strapped along his shoulders. The red on the right, flying badly on purpose, because he had worked out that if he dropped a wing, the woman shrieked. And behind those two, in a loose scatter that covered more sky than the towns underneath, the ones who had come down out of the land of death in the night, because Victor had told them there was somewhere to be. She counted them twice and got past 10 both times, and then stopped counting, because counting meant looking down. The forest ended all at once, the way a carpet ends. After that, it was cut fields and stone walls, and a road with carts on it, and then a town with a mill and a market square, and the whole of it going past far too fast underneath her. Hannah got the mask out of the bag with one hand, which took 3 tries, and put it on. It was what she wore when the witch had to be seen, and today was the largest piece of public business anybody had ever done anywhere. Below, the market square emptied. She watched it happen with the wind taking the sound away before it got up to her. People came out of doorways, looked up, and then ran back through the same doorways. A cart went over. Somewhere behind them, a bell started and did not stop. She was going to cause a great deal of trouble in these towns today, and she was aware of it, and there was no version of this where she did not. "Sorry," she said, into the wind, to nobody at all. Another town. Then a river with barges tied along it. Then a road that got wider and straighter and started to have walls beside it. Victor lifted his head. "There," he said. The capital came up out of the plain gray and enormous, the palace sitting above the rest of it on its own rise, with its banners out. Victor slowed. Then he dropped. Hannah's stomach stayed where it had been. The roofs came up at her, sorted themselves into streets, and the streets filled. Soldiers came out of the castle gate in a solid line and kept coming, spilling across the forecourt and up onto the wall, forming up in the middle of a square with no enemy in it. Civilians ran the other way, in every direction at once. Bells went off across the city, one tower starting the next, until every bell in it was ringing at nothing. Arrows came up. They came up in flights, well drilled, and arrived at the top of their climb with nothing left in them, and came off the scale with a sound like hail on a tin roof. A mage division put something bright up from a tower, and it broke apart short. Nobody down there stopped, and nobody up here noticed. The blue adjusted his shoulders under the harness. Then Victor spread his wings out over the palace and held. He simply stopped, in the air, above the royal castle of the Rodney Kingdom, with his wings at their full span, and the shadow came over the courtyard, and the steps, and the barracks, and the 2 streets behind, and the entire forecourt of soldiers stood in the dark and did not move. Somewhere down there was the hall where a prince had listened to a court mage read one line off a screen and decided she was rubbish. Hannah took the megaphone out of the bag. She checked the speakers were live. She got a breath in. She had been in the broadcasting club at school, which was the only relevant qualification she had ever had for anything. Then she opened up at full volume. "Everyone in this city, stop what you are doing and listen, and then I will go." Her voice went out of 3 sets of platform speakers strapped to 3 dragons, hit the walls of the capital, and came back off them. The red flinched hard enough to lose height. Victor's head came round. She kept going. "The people running this kingdom are not in their right minds. The woman they are calling a saint has a skill. It is called charm. It puts what she wants into your head and lets you believe you thought of it yourself. That is what has been done to you. That is why the orders stopped making sense and you carried them out anyway. That is why you all agreed. All of you, at the same time, every time. You are awake now. So look at it again. Look at what was done to the elves. Look at what was sent to the dwarves and what it was sent there to do. Look at the men who told you it was necessary and then decide for yourselves, one at a time, whether you believe a single word of it. Nobody is coming to think for you. Judge it yourselves." She stopped. The bells were still going somewhere off in the east quarter, and then those stopped too, because the men ringing them had let go of the ropes. The forecourt below her had gone still, not the stillness of men holding formation. Every face in it was turned up. On the wall, a captain with an arrow still on the string lowered his bow and looked at it as though somebody had handed it to him. In the inner courtyard, 3 maids who had been screaming behind a pillar stopped screaming. One of them stood up. In the outer hall, a line of knights lowered their weapons together, and not one of them could have said afterward when he had drawn. And in the throne room, where 9 of the kingdom's ministers had been down on the tiles, with their hands over their heads praying to be spared, a man in a minister's sash got up off the floor. He stood in the middle of the room with his mouth open and his hands out from his sides, and he looked at the man next to him, and the man next to him was already looking back. Something went out of all of them at once. Months of everybody agreeing about everything let go, and what was left was 30 men standing very still in a wing shadow, working out what they had signed. Nobody screamed. The whole capital had gone quiet enough to hear a horse breathing in the yard. Hannah sat on the back of a dragon above 70,000 people and watched a city blink. She did not know whether it had worked. She would not know for weeks. From up here, it looked like a very large number of faces pointing the same way, which was also what it had looked like before. And the only difference was that this time, nobody was doing anything at all. She raised the megaphone one more time. "All right, withdraw." Victor folded his wings in and turned north, and the sky went with him. The blue and the red came round on either side. The rest came off their stations in a long, ragged line, and the shadow came off the palace, and the light came back down onto the forecourt all at once. And by the time the capital thought to look for them, they were a smudge over the north wall. Behind them, a kingdom stood in its own square, awake, with no idea what had just been done to it. 4 days later, the doors of that throne room opened on a dead man. Douglas Harrow walked the length of the floor in a borrowed coat, with the man they had given his command to half a step behind him, and a hooded man behind them both, and requested an audience of his king. King Ethelbert was on the throne, and he had got old in it. He said the name twice, the second time as a question, and then told the guards to put their hands down. "I was sent north with my own company," Douglas said. "The order came from this palace, and it was an order to remove me. It was carried out. I am standing here because it did not take, and because somebody with no reason on this earth to bother found me afterward." He did not say who. Nobody in the room noticed that he did not. "I have a skill. It nullifies status ailments. All of them, whether I want it or not, since I was 19 years old." He looked along the row of ministers. "It is why I never agreed with any of you about the saint. Not once, in any room. And it is why she needed me gone." A minister said the word charm out loud, the way you say a word you have already accepted. Then Eddie Larkins stepped up beside him and testified against himself. "I attacked my own commanding officer in front of 60 men, he said. "I did it with my hands, and I meant it at the time." He kept his eyes on the floor between the king's feet. "Then I took 400 men over the border and put them around a dwarf village at first light, not to negotiate, to take the people in it for the crown's minds, because we had been told that was a reasonable thing to do. The hall did not make a sound. Nobody carried me there," Eddie said. "I walked. I remember agreeing with all of it. I would like that written down as it happened, and then I would like to be told what I am to do about it." A clerk in the corner had gone white and was still writing. The king let it run to the end, and then he had his son brought in. Elliot Rodney came down the floor between 2 guards with his coat still perfectly correct and his hair swept back, and he told the room what he had been telling it for 4 days. That the accusation was slander, that the woman at the church was a saint, that she was to be released today and her chair put back beside the throne, and that every man who had said otherwise was to be examined for who had got at him. His father heard him out. Then he said, to the room rather than to his son, that the boy had now been told by his physicians, by his own ministers, and twice by the king himself, and that the charm had gone out of every soul in the capital, and had not gone out of the one man in this kingdom who could not be allowed to keep it. "Elliot Rodney is removed from the succession," King Ethelbert said. "He is stripped of his titles, his household, and his allowance, and he is put out of the kingdom before the end of the month. The woman goes with him, since it is plain he will not be parted from her, and neither of them comes back inside the border while I am alive." The room did not react. Nobody gasped and nobody objected. A clerk wrote it down and a minister looked at his shoes. And Elliot stood in the middle of his father's throne room with total, perfect clarity, and understood that he was the only person left in it who had not lost his mind. They had all been got at. Serena had said this would happen, and it was happening exactly as she said. The voice over the city had been the attack itself, obviously, and every one of them had swallowed it whole and called it waking up. He said so, twice, clearly, in a room where nobody was looking at him anymore, and being right had never once in his life felt like this. Then the guards took him out through the side door, and the doors shut, and the room turned back to the man in the hood. With the permission of the throne, Douglas said. I have brought an old friend home. The hooded man walked forward on his own, went down on one knee at the mark, and put the hood back. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a face half the men along that wall had known 10 years ago and had been careful never to mention since. The minister nearest the door said his name out loud before he could stop himself. Jeremiah Rodney. The king's hands came off the arms of the throne. Your Majesty, 10 years earlier, this court had heard a charge against him that nobody had troubled to test and stripped him and put him over the border in a week. 2 of the men who signed it were in the room. One of them had to be helped into a chair. The king came down the steps, slowly, with nobody moving to help him, and stopped in front of his brother. You were not to come back, he said. No. Then I will have to make it lawful. Ethelbert turned to the hall. My half-brother's exile is void, and the charge with it. Jeremiah Rodney is my heir, and stands as regent until this kingdom can hold a pen without me guiding its hand. Douglas Harrow was made knight commander again inside the minute, refused it, and got it anyway, since the man he proposed instead had just confessed to a border invasion in open court. Eddie Larkins was kept on as his second, and told to report to a magistrate in the morning, and looked relieved about it. Nobody in that room said Hannah's name, because nobody in that room knew it. The 2 men who did know it said nothing, not where they had spent the winter, not who had fed them, not who had put a knight commander back on his feet after this palace signed him away. Nobody asked. The record of that day says the Rodney kingdom was saved by a voice out of the sky, and that is all it says. The dragons were not speaking to her. Nobody had told her before she strapped station speakers to 3 of the most dangerous animals alive and ran them at full volume that dragons hear roughly as well as they see. The blue was lying with his head flat on the floor. The red had walked into a wall on the way in and was pretending he had meant to. She brought down prime beef, the good marbled kind, in quantity. The blue ate his without lifting his head off the stone. Hannah crouched down by the blue's head. I did say thank you at the time. We did not hear you, Victor said from the doorway, arms folded, in the voice of a man who intended to be difficult about this for at least a week. I am aware of why that is. He came in, ate an entire hindquarter standing up, and continued to sulk, which she had not previously known was possible to do at the same time. Word came up from the surface in pieces over the next few days. The charm had broken across the whole country and had not come back. It had held on exactly 1 man, and he had gone over the southern border with the woman he would not be parted from, still explaining to the escort that he was right. Jeremy did not come back. He sent word instead, and the word had a seal on it. Douglas went south the same week, and Eddie with him, and the pair of them stood in her doorway on the last morning, saying nothing useful for a good 5 minutes before they went. After that, the dungeon was very quiet. There were 4 of them in it, her, a wolf, a dragon, and a golem, which was exactly the number she had started with, and she stood in her own kitchen on the first evening of it, and noticed how loud it had got in here without her ever agreeing to any of it. Victor came in and said he wanted meat today. You want meat every day. Today as well. So she made braised pork, which she had not made in a long time, because it takes hours, and there had not been an hour spare since the autumn. Pork belly in the pot with soy sauce and sugar and ginger and a great deal of patience. Eggs in the leftover sauce overnight. Rice, mustard, the white part of a leek cut fine. Garm did a lap of the kitchen every 11 minutes, which was his entire contribution. He got a folded slice of cured ham on the 4th lap and took it away under the table to eat somewhere private. Remus arrived at the point where the pot went quiet with a notebook. You are going to write this down, Hannah said. I'm going to write this down. They ate at the long table, which had been built for a great many more people than 4. Victor took the seat he always took. Garm got a bowl on the floor at the corner. Remus sat down with the notebook beside his plate and ate left-handed so he could keep writing. The meat came apart under a spoon. The eggs had gone the right color all the way through, and Victor got through the first bowl without saying anything, which from him was a review. She listened to the room while she ate. A wolf working on a bone, a spoon on a bowl, a pen. A month ago, there had been 14 people at this table, and 2 of them had been arguing about a card game. It is quiet in here, Hannah said. Yes, I did not think I would mind. She turned her bowl round on the wood. I envied them a bit at the end. All of them packing up and going home to their own country. Every one of them had somewhere to go back to. And I stood in the corridor waving them off and thought, well, that must be nice. And she stopped. In her old life, she had eaten standing at the kitchen counter with the television on for company, 6 nights out of 7, and gone to bed. She was not going to say that part out loud either. Anyway, she said, more rice? Victor did not look up from his bowl. I do not want to go back. She put the serving spoon down. Back where? The land of death. You have a whole country up there. Nobody in it argues with you, and nothing in it makes you carry speakers. I do not want to go back. Why not? Because you are here. Garm barked once, directly into the middle of it, and shoved his empty bowl across the floor with his nose until it hit the table leg and stopped. He would like seconds, Remus said, without looking up. So would I, and I have lost the quantities, the soy and the sugar. Say them again slowly. So she said them again slowly, twice, while the pen went, and Garm got his seconds and took them under the table, and Victor finished what was left in the pot without being offered any of it. Hannah sat in the middle of it with her chin on her hand and let the noise go on around her. It was a very small table, and it was full.